The girl did everything she could to save her brother, but he coldly shoved her away. "Who said you were allowed to call me brother?" With that, the man turned and walked away without looking back. He left only the little princess trembling in the cold winter night. And she had long since grown used to being treated like this. Her name was Yahello. She was the empire's most noble princess, but her raven black hair made her a symbol of ill omen. In the high priest's prophecy, light and darkness would be born on the same day. The child of light could lead the country to prosperity, but the child of darkness would bring calamity to everyone. Unfortunately, the little princess happened to be born on the day of the prophecy. Because of her black hair, she was naturally regarded as ominous. She was made to live in the most remote palace. She lived a life worse than even the servants. Meanwhile, the illegitimate daughter born on the same day had silver hair, a symbol of royal blood. Therefore, she was treated as the incarnation of light in the prophecy. Naturally, she received everyone's love. And so, the two little princesses grew up in completely different environments. In the blink of an eye, little Telodi was already 12 years old, and by her side, only Loina remained to take care of her. The palace she originally lived in had long since fallen into disrepair. Even her allowance was often withheld by the treasury. Because of a shortage of food, she learned to endure hunger at a very young age. But no matter how hard life was, the girl always wore a satisfied smile on her face. Loina looked at the child teasing butterflies. Her heart was filled with pity. If only that damned prophecy did not exist. Her little princess could have had such a beautiful garden too. But now, all of this belonged to the Princess of Light. The princes had filled it with lilies that bloomed all year round for that illegitimate daughter. And the little princess of pure royal blood could only watch from afar. Even if she wanted to come in and play, she had to do it secretly. The more Loina thought about it, the angrier she became. How could a child as kind as Telodi possibly be the child of calamity from the prophecy? Just as she was lost in thought, a rumbling sound came from the little princess's side. Loina quickly asked if the girl was hungry, but the sensible child only held her stomach and shook her head. The maid knew the little princess wanted to save her own portion of food, but if a child did not eat properly, she would get sick. So she entrusted the little princess to a knight she was close to, and went to the kitchen to prepare food herself. Little Telodi obediently followed behind Ashwin, but she had not expected to run into her brother and sister having afternoon tea in the courtyard. They were both younger sisters, yet her brother favored only the white-haired one, just because black hair represented misfortune. Even though the little princess had once saved his life, the only sister the man acknowledged in his heart was Lily. The eldest prince looked at the girl who was bowing with obvious displeasure. That disgusted look made the little princess's chest ache. That kind of coldness was just like that night a few days ago. She had anxiously waited for him to wake up and carefully called him brother. She herself was shivering from the cold, yet she had covered her brother with the only blanket. But what she got in return was only, "Don't call me brother. The only one who can call me that is my sister Lily." At that moment, the little princess felt as if her heart had been gouged out alive. The family she had yearned for so desperately treated her like a plague. "I am your sister too," the girl murmured in despair, but she engraved in her heart that she was not allowed to call him brother. So when they met again, little Telodi obediently called him crown prince. The man did not notice the change in how she addressed him. Only the little princess knew how much it hurt inside. But at that moment, Lily, who was beside them, suddenly spoke up. With a smile, she invited her sister to stay and have tea together. Naive little Telodi thought this was concern from family, but she did not expect that the moment the girl spoke, she brought up her pitch black hair. Her arrogant tone carried a faint disdain. This made the little princess feel inferior. Indeed, compared with Lily, she looked far too shabby. Her younger sister's hair was as beautiful as Lily's, and her whole body radiated noble grace, while she herself was still wearing a plain old dress. No matter how one looked at it, she did not seem like a princess at all. And besides, her black hair had always signified misfortune. At that moment, she finally understood why her family disliked her. Lily suddenly noticed the hairpin by the little princess's ear. How could she possibly allow her sister to have something she did not? So the girl arrogantly reached out her hand. "Your hairpin is quite cute. Give it to me." Lily's tone carried an order that could not be disobeyed. Seeing this, the little princess hurriedly stepped back twice. She was so anxious, she was almost about to cry. But her sister directly ignored her resistance. "If others saw this, they might think I was stealing your things. It's just a cheap lily of the valley hairpin, and you're really that unwilling to lend it to me?" Seeing Lily about to snatch it by force, the little princess somehow found a little courage within herself. Loina had once told her that the flower language of Lily of the Valley meant that one would surely become happy. So this was not merely a small hairpin. It also carried her hope for life. The girl said seriously that the hairpin was hers, so she could not lend it. As soon as she finished speaking, Lily's expression had already changed. This was the first time anyone had dared to speak to her like that. The girl angrily swept all the teacups off the table. She was waiting for her brother to stand up for her, right in front of her brother. The little princess was viciously bullied by this scheming younger sister. Scalding tea splashed all over the girl. Little Telodi frowned tightly in pain, but Lily had no intention of stopping at all. Just as a heavy slap was about to fall, the eldest prince beside them finally stood up. He suddenly grabbed Lily's small hand. "Stop it." The man's voice was gentle, but the willful younger sister did not give her brother any any face at all. She forcefully flung away his hand, and tears rolled down like pearls. "Brother, you've gone too far. You're making it sound like I'm the one trying to steal sister's things." Her accusation struck the man's heart again and again. The eldest prince quickly promised to buy her an identical hairpin, but such an answer did not satisfy Lily. Out of the corner of her eye, she glanced at the little princess who was being comforted. Why, when they were both royalty, did this girl still have to come and fight her for her brother? Thinking of this, the girl curled her lips into a sneer. Then she turned and ran out of the courtyard. She was waiting for her brother to leave her sister behind and chase after her. Watching Lily's figure run farther away, the helpless eldest prince could only tell Ashwin to go after her first. He himself stayed behind to continue drinking tea with little Taylodi. Although he did not particularly like this black-haired sister, he was not yet at the point of letting others bully her however they pleased, especially since the girl had saved his life before. Looking at the new dress on his sister, the man unexpectedly felt a trace of satisfaction as an older brother. Yet these were all things the little princess did not know. Just as the girl was hesitating over whether she should take the initiative to leave, she heard the man beside her suddenly speak. "Are you wearing a new dress?" The little princess froze at the question. So was her brother concerned about her? In her heart, she still held onto the last bit of expectation for her family. Yet when she told her brother that the dress had been custom made by Loina, the eldest prince suddenly seemed like a different person. The man slammed his hand heavily on the table. The little princess was so frightened that she immediately began trembling. She subconsciously called out brother, only to be mercilessly interrupted. "I believe I told you before not to call me that. You'd better remember it clearly. Don't think I stopped Lily because I was helping you. You're not worthy of that." The man's face was full of arrogance and disgust, and the little princess cried out in pain. She finally voiced the question that had long been buried in her heart. She too was a sister. Why could he not give her even just a tiny bit of love? But before she could finish speaking, the eldest prince cut her off stiffly. "If I had to choose between the two of you, I would choose Lily without hesitation." With that, the man turned and left without looking back, leaving the little princess behind him in floods of tears. Yet the eldest prince did not know that he had left his spellbook there, and very soon, he would regret everything he had done before. The girl prepared to leave in loneliness, but the moment she lifted her foot, she kicked the spellbook her brother had dropped. Driven by curiosity, the little princess picked up the book, but she had not expected that she could actually understand the spells written in it. They were all in a language she had never seen before. At that thought, the girl's eyes instantly lit up. She had long heard that learning magic required extremely high talent. Someone like her, who could directly decipher spells, was even rarer than 1 in 10,000. If she could learn the magic in the book, would her brother look at her a little more? Would that mean she had the value of being loved? The little princess thought humbly. Then a special line of text suddenly appeared before her eyes. The magic of seeking fate. It seemed that even her brother had failed to understand this part. Curious, the girl read the spell aloud, but she had not expected the magic to actually take effect. A flash of white light appeared. The next second, she was teleported into an unfamiliar room. The pitch-black surroundings sent a chill down one's spine. But just then, heavy footsteps suddenly sounded behind the little princess. She turned around in terror. She saw a black-haired boy in shackles looking down at her. "If you go back right now, I may consider not killing you." There was no expression on the boy's face, but the little princess instinctively felt that this person was very frightening. She just had not expected the magic to fail at such a critical moment. No matter how many times she recited the spell from the book, the surroundings did not change in the slightest. At this, the little princess fell into complete despair. She trembled all over as she waited for death, but unexpectedly, the boy only gently touched the lily of the valley hairpin by her ear. His attitude was so gentle that it was as if everything just now had never happened. Later, little Taylodi learned that this boy's name was Riven. He was not some imprisoned prisoner. On the contrary, he was the master of this castle. It was just that, for some unknown reason, he had no choice but to wear handcuffs. And he was not as frightening as he looked. One could even say that he had a very good temper. He would prepare sumptuous meals for the little princess, and would care about the tiny wounds on her hands. Every time the girl learned a new spell, she would show it to Riven at once, and the boy would patiently watch, then gently praise her for improving. These were all forms of care that little Taylodi had never felt from her family. She had long since regarded Riven as her own brother. If she could, the little princess truly wanted to live here forever, but she had a reason she absolutely had to go back, because Loina was still waiting for her in the palace. So the girl began studying magic even harder. She just had not expected that the little spell she had newly learned would almost cause a disaster. In order to return to her brother's side, the little princess worked until she was almost fainting. She practiced the teleportation spell over and over again, and her body ached faintly from overusing her magic. But even so, she still could not find a way to go back. Seeing the girl's face grow paler day by day, Riven, who had originally not intended to interfere, finally could not bear to watch any longer. He required the little princess to use magic only 50 times a day, and for the next lesson, she had to wait until her body recovered. The little princess protested in a huff, but Riven directly ignored her dissatisfaction. With one raise of his hand, the boy placed the spellbook on the highest shelf, but he never could have imagined that, in order to go home. The little princess would not even care about her own life. That very night, the girls secretly climbed onto the ladder beside the bookshelf. The spellbook was placed very high, and even standing on tiptoe, the little princess was still far from reaching it, but she wanted to go home so badly. So the girl climbed up another rung despite the danger. Just when she thought she was about to get the book, her body suddenly lost its balance. There was only a loud crash. The little princess fell heavily from the bookshelf. This time, her plan to steal the book had failed, and it also woke Riven next door. The girl waited aggrievedly for the boy's punishment, but unexpectedly, the first thing he cared about was her injury. Riven gently lifted her bangs. The instant the gauze touched the wound, the little princess let out a soft whimper of pain, and her pretty little face scrunched up into a ball. Seeing this scene, the boy's heart felt as if it had been fiercely stabbed. He made his movements even gentler, yet he could not help blaming himself inside. If he had not hidden the book away, this child would not have been hurt at all. But on the matter of limiting her practice, he still would not compromise, because the backlash caused by exhausting one's magic power was irreversible. When severe, it could even endanger one's life. During these days, Riven had long since regarded little Taylodi as his own younger sister. As an older brother, how could he bear to watch his family risk her life? In the days that followed, little Taylodi kept learning magic under Riven's guidance, although she did not practice many times. With an expert's guidance, however, her progress was still extremely fast. On this day, just like usual, the little princess learned another new spell. Look. She excitedly wanted to show it to her brother, but the moment she recited the spell, the bookshelf beside her lost control and toppled toward her. The moment he saw this, Riven's heart nearly stopped for a beat. He instinctively lunged forward. Subconsciously, he used his back to block the heavy bookshelf. Cold sweat slid down the boy's cheeks, but he completely ignored the sharp pain in his body and worriedly asked the girl whether she had been hurt. Seeing his younger sister obediently shake her head, the heart he had been holding up finally settled. Riven pretended that he was not injured, but little Taylodi's eyes reddened because of this. At last, she had family who would dote on her and love her. Meanwhile, on the other side, the biased white-haired older brother only now realized that his younger sister was missing. The older brother had given all his tenderness to that scheming green tea younger sister, and the little princess who truly cared about him, no one even noticed when she went missing. Back then, it was little Taylodi who saved the gravely wounded crown prince. She carefully bandaged his wounds. She even covered her brother with the only blanket she had. After finishing everything, the girl was filthy all over because she was afraid her brother would dislike her. The tiny girl could only curl up on the ground all alone. The cold night wind made the little princess tremble, but in her heart, she felt sweet. She was finally no longer that pitiful child with no family. However, just as the little princess had fallen asleep, the crown prince woke from his unconsciousness. The wounds on his body had already been properly treated. Only then did he notice a tiny little figure curled up beside his hand. The man subconsciously wanted to pat his little sister on the head, but in the end, he held himself back. According to the high priest's prophecy, darkness would one day swallow the light, and the only solution was to stay away. The crown prince cast a complicated glance at his sister's black hair, then turned around and left coldly. But what he had not expected was that the two of them would meet again the very next day. The little princess followed behind the maid stiffly. She couldn't help it. On her timid little face still hung a fawning smile. That shrinking, timid appearance made the crown prince inexplicably irritable. Thank you for what happened last night, but I also have to thank you for managing to pull out a torn old blanket from all those things and cover me with it. Go on, tell me. What reward do you want? The man's arrogant attitude was no different from charity, and the little princess's eyes reddened in grievance. How she wanted to tell her brother that that blanket was already the best thing she could find. But in the end, the little princess only voiced her wish. She told her brother that she wanted a few beautiful new dresses. Of course, all of these were for Loina. She did not want even one for herself. Hearing this answer, the crown prince had not expected such a wish from his sister, so he wanted to give her a gift. So he not only had dresses made for Loina, he also casually had a few custom made for his sister. He treated it as repayment for the girl taking care of him that night. That way, he could continue ignoring the sister with a clear conscience. It was just that the crown prince had not expected that the maid would take credit for what he had done. So when he heard his sister say that was why he became so angry, he planned to go find that maid and confront her face to face. Unexpectedly, just as he left the small garden, he ran into her. Did you like the dresses I gave you? Before Loina could even react, the crown prince aggressively questioned her about why she had lied. Loina was so frightened that her whole body trembled. But when she thought of all the grievances the little princess had suffered over the years, she suddenly was no longer afraid. Your Highness, you truly are a despicable man. You are only slightly kind to people when you yourself are in a good mood. When you are unhappy, you simply cast them aside. In your eyes, our princess is not even 1/10,000th as important as Princess Lily. But if that is the case, why give her that tiny, insignificant bit of hope? Do you know how painful it is when a sincere heart is trampled over and over again? Loina's words were like sharp blades stabbing into the crown prince's heart. Outrageous, humiliated, and enraged, he wanted to retort, but he could not say a single word. He remembered the joy on his sister's face when she called him brother. Then he remembered the despair on her tear-streaked face when she was abandoned. Was he really as terrible as Loina said? The more the man thought, the more his heart hurt. In the end, he fled in a sorry state. That scheming green tea younger sister openly bullied the little princess. Afterward, she even ran to their imperial father and falsely accused the victim first. The girl looked at the man seated in the place of honor with reddened eyes. Her tearful, delicate appearance made it seem as if she had suffered an enormous injustice. She said pitifully that she had only wanted to take a look at her sister's hairpin. She had not expected her sister to get angry. Lily put on a well-behaved look of "I don't blame big sister." With just one sentence, she won everyone present's favor. For a time, rumors spread all through the palace that the ill-omened imperial princess had bullied the Princess of Light. Many people said Princess Telodi had no upbringing. Some even said that the divine prophecy was about to come true. Only by executing the little princess could the people's hearts be stabilized. Before long, these words also reached the second prince's ears. The young man's eyes suddenly darkened. This was completely different from the timid little girl in his memory. Noah vaguely remembered that their first meeting had been on a winter afternoon. Little Telodi had been huddled on the steps, sadly tugging at her own hair. She was even muttering that it was all because she was too dirty that people disliked her. The second prince's gaze was unconsciously drawn over. Just by looking at her hair, he had already recognized that this child was the darkness from the high priest's prophecy. But as an imperial princess, she was dressed far too poorly. The little princess looked thin and small. She did not look dangerous at all like the prophecy had said. Thinking this, the second prince walked over against the light. Seeing the girl shivering from the cold, he was inexplicably compelled to take off his cloak. The sudden warmth instantly made the little princess's eyes turn red. But this cloak was truly far too precious. She wanted her brother to quickly take it back. But the second prince gently shook his head. He thoughtfully adjusted the collar for his little sister. Just think of this as concern from your family. The young man had many cloaks like this, but the little princess's expression at the time was as if she had found a treasure. So how could such a sensible child do something like snatch another person's belongings? The second prince prepared to find a chance to ask his elder brother. Meanwhile, the crown prince had also heard the same rumor. His heart wavered even more. But according to the high priest's prophecy, approaching darkness would bring disaster. He was unwilling to give up the throne that was almost within his grasp. Just as he was struggling greatly, hurried knocking sounded outside the study. Seeing that the person who came was Knight Ashwin, the crown prince impatiently waved his hand. But in the next second, he heard news that shocked him beyond measure. Her Highness Telodi has gone missing. The man's heart suddenly clenched. A powerful sense of unease instantly surged into his heart, and he suddenly regretted it. The man frantically rummaged through the magic books in the drawer. He vaguely remembered that one of them recorded a locating spell, but after searching for a long time, there was still no sign of that book. At that moment, the crown prince completely panicked. He crazily ordered people to search for the missing little princess. As for himself, he collapsed weakly into the chair. He had never imagined that one day his sister would completely disappear from his world, without even giving him a chance to regret it. The man painfully recalled the scene from a few days earlier. He had clearly seen Lily snatch the little princess's hairpin, but as her older brother, he had done nothing. If he really had to choose one of the two, he had even said to his sister that he would choose Lily without the slightest hesitation. If only he had turned back and looked once at that time, he would have noticed the girl's tears of despair. Actually, it was not that the crown prince did not love his sister. It was just that his childhood experiences had blinded his eyes. His mother was a paranoid madwoman. From childhood, she had demanded that he become the perfect heir. Verbal abuse and whipping were nothing more than everyday occurrences. He could only treat inheriting the throne as his sole goal. Even so, the crown prince still deeply loved this harsh woman. But not long afterward, his mother died. And because of that, the young him became dispirited. Until the boy met Lily for the first time, that child who was as beautiful as a lily flower. The tiny girl softly called him brother. In an instant, the high walls around the crown prince's heart were shattered. Originally, he had not believed at all that there was any such thing as divine prophecy. But at that moment, he regarded his white-haired younger sister as a deity, though he did not know why. In his memory, Lily's bright and beautiful little face gradually became blurred. Replacing it instead was the smile on little Tylodi's face. At this very moment, it felt as if the crown prince's chest had been torn open alive. He clearly did care about the little princess. But why did he always have to hurt her again and again? If heaven could give him one more chance, he would definitely treat this sister well. Thinking this, the man got up and went to the little princess's side palace. The high priest had repeatedly warned him not to go there, but he could no longer care about so much. Compared with his sister's safety, what did the position of crown prince even matter? But what he had not expected was that the empress's palace where his sister lived was so dilapidated, and he was also about to learn those truths that would leave him in endless regret. The man walked alone toward the little princess's palace, but the deeper he went, the heavier his heart became. The desolate courtyard seemed to wordlessly accuse his favoritism, and after stepping into the inner hall, He was even more shocked by everything before his eyes. The wooden beams looked as if they might collapse the next second. In such a vast palace, he could not even find a single candle for lighting. This was not a place fit for human habitation at all. Yet his sister had lived in such an environment for 10 years. For a moment, the man's heart was filled with mixed emotions. He asked Loina to take him to see the little princess's room. However, he had barely stepped onto the stairs when the crown prince nearly missed his footing. Lowering his head, he finally noticed the broken-down staircase under his feet. The moment he thought that the one who might have been hurt was his sister, his heart trembled violently again. But Loina seemed as if she had long since grown used to all of this. Helplessly, she said that she also knew the stairs were dangerous, but they simply had no extra money for repairs. On the palace side, they often withheld the little princess's allowance, so even filling their stomachs was already very difficult for them. The winters here had always been very cold, but even when her hands were covered with sores from the freezing cold, that child had never complained, nor had she ever indulged in wild hopes. At this point, Loina's gaze suddenly softened. Her Highness always fantasized that one day, her family would come to take her back. So no matter how hard life was, she still remained like a little son. Seeing the way she looked so full of hope, I truly could not bear to shatter her dream with my own hands. Like blade after blade, Loina mercilessly laid bare the truths the crown prince did not dare face. The man could no longer imagine what could feel worse than this moment. So was he, as a brother, really this terrible? It was he who had chosen Lily over and over again. And it was also he who had pushed his sister farther and farther away again and again. While the crown prince was lost in wild thoughts, the group had already arrived at the door of the room. Even from far away, the man could smell the pungent odor of mold. And after pushing open the door, the scene inside was even worse. The dark and damp environment was not even as good as a servant's woodshed. And in the wardrobe, there were only old and filthy clothes left. The man suddenly realized something. In pain, he covered his eyes and let the tears keep sliding down. His sister had covered him with the cleanest blanket she had, and he, with the cruelest words, had viciously wounded that heart which was already shattered. At the thought of the girl's despairing eyes, the crown prince wished he could slap himself to death. He was the worst brother in the world. Yet from the corner of his eye, he unintentionally caught sight of that cloak in the wardrobe. Its luxurious style was utterly out of place with this dilapidated room. It was as if the crown prince had grabbed the last life-saving straw. Instinctively, he felt that this garment was related to his sister's disappearance. Unfortunately, Loina told him that this had been given to the little princess by the second prince before his death. The girl could not bear to wear it, so she had always kept it folded neatly, refusing to put it on. Whenever she missed her family, she would take it out and hold it for a while, but she did not dare hold it for too long either. She was afraid of damaging this only gift she had. Loina's voice was choked with sobs. She had once begged the little princess not to keep loving those family members anymore. They were not worth it, but at that time, the girl had only smiled and gently shaken her head. Her eyes were full of helplessness. I also wish I could stop liking them, but that is not something I can do just because I wish it. After hearing Loina's words, the crown prince was already in floods of tears. Like a trapped beast, he howled helplessly in the darkness. If heaven would give him one more chance, he would definitely spend the rest of his life making up for these more than 10 years of neglect. Unfortunately, all the clues had gone cold. Now the only person who might possibly have taken away the little princess was the assassin who had appeared a few days earlier. That day, it was the high priest who had come to find him on his own initiative. He had even spoken with absolute certainty, saying that a dangerous person was lurking by the side of the Princess of Light. So the crown prince did not think twice before rushing to Lily's bedchamber. And just as the high priest had predicted, the moment he entered, he saw a man wrapped all over in a black robe, chanting an attack spell. At that critical moment, the crown prince instinctively stepped in front of his younger sister. The sharp blade of light pierced straight through his waist and abdomen. But even so, he was still raising a magical barrier for Lily. Later, that man fled toward the little princess's side palace, and he pursued him all the way to this area. Unfortunately, he failed to catch the assassin, and instead fainted himself from excessive blood loss. Thinking of this, the crown prince's heart ached sharply once again. He could be injured and bleed for Lily, yet he had left the little princess, who had taken care of him all night, behind on the spot. He clearly had two younger sisters, but because of his own favoritism, he had personally lost one of them. The crown prince's hands began to tremble uncontrollably. In fact, he had long since placed little Taylody in a position just as important as Lily, but because of that damned bit of pride, he kept hurting the girl's feelings again and again. The man painfully grabbed his own hair. He did not dare think about those details from the past, but everything before his eyes was rudely reminding him just how much of a failure he had been as an older brother. The crown prince deceived himself by thinking that if he had reached out his hand that day, even just once, perhaps his sister would not have left in disappointment. Perhaps she would have forgiven him. It wasn't that he had not seen the tattered clothes on his sister. It wasn't that he had not seen her face covered in tears. He had merely pretended not to see. The man's nails dug deeply into his flesh, but this bit of pain was nothing compared with the pain in his heart. That child had gone hungry while taking care of him all night. Yet all he had given his sister was charity. He had even forbidden the girl from calling him brother. Call me crown prince. He had even forbidden the girl from calling him brother. Yet that child still carefully held on to the few old clothes they had given her. The crown prince could no longer tell whether what he felt at this moment was heartbreak or despair. He silently turned around. Now the only hope left was to find the magic book as soon as possible. Even if his sister still refused to forgive him after returning, he would definitely bring her back. Meanwhile, the crown prince was still searching the world over for his sister. And in a distant eastern kingdom, the little princess had already begun a sweet life with her new older brother. Riven gave little Taylodi a magical garden blooming with lilies of the valley. The shy little flowers drooped their heads, as if softly telling the little princess in the language of flowers that she must be happy. It was just that this familiar scene was far too similar, and in an instant, it made the girl's nose sting with tears. More than once, she had envied the lily garden Lily had. She had also fantasized countless times that her brothers could give her one too. Unfortunately, dreams were dreams after all, and they still shattered. So it turned out that it was not that she was unworthy of having one. It was simply that her family had never loved her. She subconsciously touched the hairpin by her ear, but to her surprise, this gift, which was extremely important to her, was gone. The girl hurriedly looked around for it, but Riven gently patted her shoulder. He comforted the little princess and told her to eat something first. Then he took out the sandwiches he had prepared in advance from the basket. During this period, the young man had already figured out the girl's tastes, and he was also very willing to take care of the little princess's daily life like a personal butler. Come to think of it, if his younger sister were still alive now, she would be about the same age as the girl. The young man's eyes, as he looked at little Taylodi, were full of remembrance. Just then, the little princess suddenly spoke. She asked curiously whether Riven's hands could be freed, seeing how inconvenient it was for her brother to move. The girl really wanted to use magic to help him. Compared with the crown prince's cold words, this new older brother had never once despised her ominous black hair. He even protected her gently, like a knight. So in just a few short days, Riven's place in little Taylodi's heart had already far surpassed that of those two heartless brothers. Because of this, the girl truly wanted to do something for the young man from the bottom of her heart. She touched her brother's wrist with concern. The rough shackles had long since rubbed that place raw with wounds. If only she could help her brother. Thinking of this, the little princess suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Maybe the book contained magic to open the shackles, and she also wanted to use this opportunity to try the spell to go home one more time. So the little princess gently tugged at her brother's sleeve. With an obedient look on her face, she said she was going to look in the book for a way to unlock them. But before she could turn around, Riven had already grabbed her wrist. A trace of slyness flashed in the young man's eyes. The little princess instantly felt as if her thoughts had been seen through. Yet before she could run away, Riven behind her had already spoken with a smile. "You're not trying to fool me, are you?" Hearing this, the girl stammered and shook her head, but the young man had already smiled until his eyes curved. Only then did the little princess realize that she had been teased. But joking aside, Riven once again seriously emphasized the importance of rest. Overusing magic was no different from overdrawing one's life. He could understand the girl's desire to go home, but there was no way he would hand over that magic book. After saying that, the young man even blinked innocently. That irritating look of his made the little princess quite angry, seeing the girl's lively expression. Riven also revealed a gratified smile. This child was already much livelier than when she had first arrived. It seemed that his efforts had not been in vain. The next second, the young man raised his hand and ruffled his younger sister's long hair. Then he helplessly said that for the time being he did not want to remove the handcuffs, because if he did, some people would be afraid. He casually curled the corner of his mouth. Anyway, to him, wearing shackles for a lifetime was not impossible. Riven said it lightly, but the little princess's heart suddenly clenched tight, and she loudly told Riven that he could not hide away and live like that. She knew what kind of despair it was to be feared by everyone, so she could not let her brother continue sinking into the mire. After spending these days together, she had already regarded Riven as her most important family. That was why she could not bear to see the young man tortured by the shackles. The little princess looked at him with heartache. Her wet eyes looked as if she would cry the next second. This time, it was Riven who was at a loss instead. He could only compromise and promise his younger sister that he would definitely not hide away and live. And sooner or later, his handcuffs would be removed. Only after hearing this did the little princess finally feel completely relieved. She asked curiously whether Riven also liked lilies of the valley, but the young man had already turned away in loneliness. A bitter smile curled at the corner of his mouth, and then he said lightly, "My former family liked them." From the little princess's voice, she could not hear too much emotion, yet she could feel an almost inescapable despair in it. It was just like every time she had wanted to get close to the crown prince, even though she knew that getting close to him was no different from a moth flying into a flame. Even covered in wounds, she still rushed toward him without hesitation. She could not stop loving her family, just as Lowena had taught her. Love was never supposed to ask for anything in return. Over the next few days, the little princess pestered him every day to see that magic book. Unable to withstand his younger sister's repeated soft pleading, Riven finally returned the magic book to the girl. But no matter what, the young man had never expected that his younger sister would find a way back so quickly. It was a bright and beautiful afternoon. The little princess was quietly sitting in the courtyard reading. The breeze gently lifted the girl's long hair, yet she was reading with unusual concentration because she had found a magical spell. According to the description, as long as the magic circle was completed, one could immediately be teleported to the side of the person who missed them. The little princess could not wait to give it a try. She firmly believed that Lowena must still be thinking about her. At that moment, however, Riven suddenly appeared. "You're working hard." A trace of admiration flashed through the young man's eyes, and the little princess said playfully that she just did not want to trouble him anymore. She had already found a way to go back. After saying that, the girl began reciting an incantation on her own. Under Riven's shocked gaze, a strange portal appeared out of thin air. The little princess was also preparing to leave with the help of magic. She could not bear to part with Riven, this handsome and gentle older brother, but in the end, Lowena was the family member who had taken care of her for a full 10 years. Thinking of this, the girl activated the spell to go home. But she had not expected that Riven, who had always indulged her in everything, would disregard the danger and hug her tightly. No matter how the little princess struggled, the young man refused to let go. And, of course, he had his own reasons for doing so. Most teleportation magic came with danger, and with his younger sister's weak body, she simply could not withstand it at all. Under such circumstances, the slightest carelessness could cause her to be reduced to ashes. So no matter what, Riven would not let his younger sister take such a risk. Unfortunately, the little princess did not understand her brother's intentions at all. She only knew that Lowena was still waiting for her. The girl desperately reached toward the portal before her. Yet in the next second, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. It was as if someone had fiercely poked her there. In the blink of an eye, that magic gate disappeared. Watching Lowena's gradually shrinking figure, a wave of overwhelming despair instantly surged up in the little princess's heart. If this attempt failed, perhaps there would never be another chance. Thinking of this, she ignored all attempts to stop her and cast magic again. In an instant, stretches of grass spread rapidly from beneath her feet like melting snow, and both she and Riven were swept into a gorgeous space where she saw Lowena's phantom. It was standing right in front of her, and she had clearly been only a little bit away from going home. "Can you hear me?" Thinking of this, the girl trembled as she lunged toward that phantom, but behind her, Riven shouted loudly. Judging from the current situation, the entire spell was already on the verge of going out of control. His younger sister might die, but the little princess could not listen to a single word of it. She wanted so badly to return to Lowena's side. Even though the pain caused by the magical backlash made her whole body tremble, she still struggled forward step by step toward that phantom. Even if she had to crawl, she would crawl back to Lowena's side. Yet in the next second, a wave of intense dizziness suddenly swept through her brain. In an instant, the world seemed to darken. The unguarded little princess fell heavily just like that, but the pain she had expected never came. Riven caught her steadily. The young man carefully gathered the girl into his arms. Looking at his younger sister's unfocused eyes, his heart was left with nothing but deep self-blame. If he had not stopped her, perhaps the girl would not have suffered such serious internal injuries. But he also had hardships he could not speak of. Riven let out a bitter sigh, and his expression gradually softened as well. After spending these days together, he had already grown fond of this optimistic and cheerful child. He still remembered when she had first arrived. Because she lacked a sense of security, she always liked to curl up alone in a corner. She also always ate very little of the food prepared for her, as if enduring hunger had long since become her instinct. And yet she was so kind. He had only given her a little concern in passing. Yet that child had been so moved that she cried tears of gratitude. All these strange behaviors made Riven feel that this sensible child seemed never to have truly been treated kindly by anyone. In little Tailodi, Riven could always see his former self. That was why he hoped even more that the girl could obtain happiness. Because of her brother's obstruction, the little princess suffered magical backlash and fell unconscious. At this moment, she was lying weakly on the bed. Her pale little face looked as if she might stop breathing the next second. Riven stayed by her side, taking care of her with heartache. But because the girl's injuries were too severe, she had still not woken up for a long time. At this moment, she was having a long, beautiful dream. In the dream, many people were desperately looking for her. Luna, Knight Ashwin, and even the Crown Prince. They were all worried about her. At the end of the dream, her brother seemed to cry. That kind of sadness was like having lost the most important treasure. So, were those really tears her brother had shed for her? In the next second, the little princess woke from the dream. But where was there any sorrowful Crown Prince before her eyes? By her bedside, there was only Riven, carefully taking care of her. At this moment, the girl's heart, once full of expectation, instantly sank. She should have understood it long ago. The crown prince would not miss her, with considerate Lily by his side. Her brother probably still did not even know that he had lost her. The little princess hid the disappointment in her eyes with a bitter smile. Then she gently nestled into Riven's arms. Seeing that the little princess, who had been unconscious for days, had finally awakened, how could the young man still care about maintaining the elegance of a noble gentleman as usual? He gave his younger sister a long, nagging lecture. Only after confirming that she was not in serious danger did Riven's hanging heart finally settle. He gently told the little princess that tomorrow's breakfast would include her favorite raspberry sandwich, so tonight she absolutely had to rest well. After saying that, Riven prepared to turn off the light and leave, but before he could turn around, his younger sister gently tugged at his sleeve. The little princess pitifully raised her little face, and only after quite a while did she stammer out a plea. "Could you stay with me a little longer?" Before Riven could answer, the girl had already started crying first. She solemnly declared that she absolutely would not be a bother. Even 1 minute would be fine. She was afraid of the dark if she slept alone. After saying this, the little princess realized that she had said the wrong thing. After making so many excessive requests, she would probably be hated, right? She hurriedly apologized to her brother. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been willful. Please, don't leave me behind." By the end of it, the little princess herself no longer even knew what she was saying. She was only afraid that Riven would leave as heartlessly as the crown prince had. Just as the girl was letting her thoughts run wild, the young man had already sat back down by the bed, and he spoke in a muffled voice. "Even staying with you until you fall asleep is fine. But who on earth told you that needing someone to stay with you means you're throwing a tantrum?" Riven's voice was thick with barely restrained anger, but the girl was not afraid at all. She even felt that the way Riven looked when he was angry was very similar to Loina. That was the kind of emotion only family members who truly cared about her would reveal. At that thought, the little princess suddenly relaxed. So she gently shook her head. No one had ever told her that, but only loved children have the right to be willful, and the unloved one, once she cries or makes a fuss, will lose everything. After saying that, the girl bitterly touched her black hair. From the moment she was born, she was destined not to be the favored child. She also wanted to have a harbor where she could take shelter from the storm. The girl helplessly tugged at her black hair. Even her blood-related family could not tolerate her, let alone Riven, whom she had only known for a few days. Maybe she really was just as the prophecy said, born with misfortune. Otherwise, why was it always her who was abandoned every time? At last, the little princess spoke the deepest secret hidden in her heart, but the boy's eyes gradually turned red. The wounds of their childhood were unexpectedly so similar. Both of them were left covered in scars by the family they loved most. That was why he had been so stubborn and unwilling to let the little princess leave. It was Riven who had secretly taken his sister's hairpin, and it was also he who had forcibly endured the backlash and interrupted the girl's magic. The boy had tried every possible way just to keep his sister by his side, but now it seemed that the little princess was determined to go back. So, was he going to be abandoned once again? At this moment, Riven could no longer care about maintaining his cold and aloof appearance. He almost pleaded as he asked his sister whether she could stay a few more days, but the little princess could only shake her head helplessly. She told Riven that if she stayed like this any longer, she was afraid Loina would do something foolish, and she also wanted to make one final effort, although she had already warned herself again and again not to harbor any illusions about her family anymore. The family affection she had longed for over more than 10 years was not something she could simply let go of just because she said so. After hearing his sister's words, Riven could only let out a helpless sigh. Sure enough, he still had absolutely no way to deal with the little princess. The boy gently lifted his sister's little hand. He stuffed the lily of the valley hairpin, which symbolized happiness, back into the girl's hand. Not everyone in this world will love you, so there is no need for you to love everyone either. Look, haven't the people who truly love you already appeared? The tenderness in the boy's eyes was almost overflowing. He softly said he was sorry. He should not have selfishly trapped the girl by his side. But before he could finish speaking, the little princess suddenly threw herself into his arms. The kind-hearted girl did not suspect in the slightest that it was her brother who had taken her hairpin. Listening to her say thank you over and over again, Riven only felt that his own despicableness had nowhere to hide. At that moment, he became even more determined to send his sister home. So after the little princess fell asleep, Riven quietly placed the magic book back onto the bookshelf. He deliberately put the book on the lower shelf, but in his heart, he still could not help praying that the girl would discover it a little later. Unfortunately, the boy's wish was destined to fail. The moment the little princess woke up, she saw the magic book on the shelf. He had steeled his heart and hurt the younger sister he loved most. So heaven had also taken back his right to be her brother. At this very moment, the eldest prince was searching for the little princess like a madman. The knights he sent out were replaced batch after batch, but all they brought back was bad news. It was as if his little sister had vanished from the face of the earth. There was not even the slightest trace left behind. The man irritably slammed the documents hard onto the desk. He had long since grown sick of hearing the words, "We've already done everything we could. We've already done everything we could." The moment he thought that his sister might be out there, starving and freezing, the eldest prince's heart clenched sharply. In a rage, he rebuked the knights for their incompetence, but as he cursed them, he painfully grabbed and tugged at his own hair. In the final analysis, all the fault lay with him. It was because he had utterly failed as her brother. Now, every single corner of the palace had already been searched through by him once. The only hope could now be placed on the second prince, whose magic was outstanding. Although the relationship between the brothers was not harmonious, for the sake of finding his sister, the eldest prince still gritted his teeth and summoned his younger brother. At this moment, he looked exactly like a gambler willing to pay any price. As long as he could find his sister, he was willing to give anything. Meanwhile, the little princess had just recovered from the magical backlash. She weakly moved her stiff body. Her big eyes, filled with anticipation, anxiously searched for that gentle boy. Unfortunately, Riven seemed to have already left. A trace of disappointment flashed through the girl's eyes. However, at that moment, she noticed something. Could it be that brother had deliberately placed this here? At that thought, the little princess laboriously rose onto her tiptoes. Unfortunately, the book was still placed too high. No matter how hard the girl tried, she simply could not reach it. After trying several times in a row, the little princess sat back down on the bed in frustration. Her little face, soft and puffy like a milk bun, was puffed up with anger as she muttered in dissatisfaction. Brother couldn't have done it on purpose, could he? Yet at just that moment, a sudden flash of inspiration struck her little head. During this period, she had also learned quite a few practical everyday spells. Now, they just happened to come in handy. At that thought, the girl softly recited a summoning spell. Unexpectedly, the book on the shelf steadily fell right into her arms. This belonged to the eldest prince. The little princess quickly wiped away the dust on it with her sleeve. She carefully flipped to the spell that could send her home. But at that very moment, the girl suddenly hesitated. On one side was Loina, who took care of her like a mother, and on the other side was Riven, who treasured her like a precious jewel. Both sides were family she could not bear to part with. But in the end, the little princess still chose to go home. The girl devoutly recited the spell from the book. Yet this time, the portal did not appear. Her magic had failed. Brother finally realized that the little princess who had always been disliked was the younger sister who truly cared about him. And Lily, whom he had loved for 10 years, had never once cared whether he lived or died. But he had been as blind as if he could not see. Again and again, with his own hands, he had hurt that heart that was already shattered. If only everything could start over, then perhaps his heart would not hurt as much as it did now. But now, he could only place his final hope on the second prince, hoping to find some clue to his sister. So, for the first time, the eldest prince lowered his proud head. He humbly begged Noah to help him. That defeated look made him seem like a gambler who had lost everything. Yet in the end, all efforts were futile. Even the most powerful search spell could not find the slightest trace of the little princess. Watching the magical glow gradually dissipate, the hope in the eldest prince's eyes also dimmed little by little. Meanwhile, the little princess, anxious to return home, kept encountering one magical failure after another. She stared at her own hands in frustration. Where exactly had the problem come from? After trying again and again many times, the girl finally found the hidden reason. The summoning spell just now had already exhausted the little magic power she had in her body. Now, if she wanted to leave, she could only obediently lie back in bed and rest first. She could not help but let out a soft sigh. She had spent a long time preparing herself mentally before she was finally willing to go back. Otherwise, she truly could not rest easy leaving Riven here all alone. She always felt that beneath the boy's powerful exterior was hidden a heart shattered into pieces. It was just a pity that now she still had reasons why she absolutely had to go back. The little princess decided that after returning home and letting them know she was safe, she would find a chance to come back again. Because deep in her heart, she had long since accepted by default that Riven was her brother, and Riven knew none of this. He had already prepared himself to let go. No matter how unbearably reluctant he was to part with the little princess in the depths of his heart, he could not, like some villain, keep the girl trapped by his side for her whole life. To love someone is to fulfill her happiness. And what Riven had to do was help the little princess realize all her wishes. As he thought about it, the boy's eyes grew so sore and bitter that they ached. But he still tried hard to keep a smile on his face. By now, that child should already have returned to her family's side, shouldn't she? He hoped she would remember his advice. Some people are not worth loving. You must first learn to love yourself before loving others. At that thought, Riven lowered his head and looked at his shackles. It was also time for him to let go of the past and face his life head-on. So the male lead, gentle and strong, had once had a past too painful to look back on. That was why he had voluntarily put on shackles, to seal off his own heart. As a child, Riven had also once had a happy and complete family. His father was the most renowned lord in the empire, and as the heir, he had displayed astonishing magical talent from a young age. The people all adored this powerful and well-behaved child. That was why they jokingly called him the ace of the Fulman region. For a time, Pride blinded the boy's eyes, and tragedy also quietly brewed in the shadows. At this time, Riven had long since been so overwhelmed by endless praise that it had gone to his head. He began trying all kinds of dangerous forbidden magic, yet during one accidental mistake, the out-of-control spell brutally broke his younger brother's legs. Even though after the incident, his parents did not blame him, the seed of guilt had already taken root and sprouted in the boy's heart. Between apologizing and running away, he chose the latter, because he feared that this evil power would hurt the family he loved most once again. Riven stubbornly sealed himself off completely. He thought that as long as he stayed away, no more accidents would happen. If the story had ended here, they should still have remained a happy family of 4. However, for some unknown reason, rumors that extermination magic had appeared in the world began spreading rapidly among the people. In the end, they also reached the Emperor's ears. The crazed Emperor wanted to obtain this evil power, so he summoned the Fullman father and son. Again and again, Father instructed Riven. No matter what happened, he absolutely must not admit it. But once they reached the palace hall, the development of events far exceeded his imagination. The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, they were surrounded by fully armed guards. And what shocked him even more was that his mother and younger brother were here too. At this moment, Riven completely understood. This was a trap prepared especially for him. The next second, the Emperor stood before Riven. I have something to confirm. I hear that Fullman's ace can use extermination magic. That whisper-like murmur was even more terrifying than the curse of an evil spirit. The boy could only lower his head, not daring to answer. It was not that he did not want to admit it, but the moment he admitted it, Father would bear the charge of treason. Yet in the end, Riven had still underestimated the ugliness of human nature. Before he could even react, the Emperor's blade had already viciously stabbed into his father's body. And at the same time, painful screams also came from where his mother and younger brother were. Hearing his family's flesh being torn apart little by little, their bones being broken inch by inch, Riven could no longer endure such torment. In despair, he recited the spell. The next second, a terrifying magic array shrouded everyone's heads like a descending evil specter. Yet, at this critical moment, his dying father suddenly grabbed his son's sleeve. Using the very last of his strength, he stopped Riven's attack. She was the true princess, gentle and kind. Yet, because of her black hair, she was bullied by the arrogant and manipulative fake imperial princess, wearing the shabbiest dress. When they first met, Riven even mistook little Tailodi for a balloon that had accidentally drifted into the forbidden area. But only later did he learn that the one he had picked up was actually the little princess of an enemy country. And she, just like him, possessed world-shocking magical talent. Looking at the girl's eyes, full of longing for knowledge, Riven seemed to see his former self from those years, equally gifted beyond compare, equally spirited and high-spirited, and likewise so innocent that it made one's heart ache. This made Riven subconsciously treat little Tailodi as his own younger sister. He placed all the guilt he had carried for his family over these years onto the little princess. But even so, he still could not forgive the person he had once been. If back then he had hardened his heart and killed that shameless emperor, would his family perhaps not have died so miserably in agony? But in this world, there is ultimately no medicine for regret. Under his father's restraint, Riven gave up the attack, but his mercy was rewarded only with the Emperor's ever more excessive cruelty. In the end, kindness still lost to vicious malice. Watching his loved ones fall one by one into pools of blood, tears covered the boy's cheeks. But no matter how hoarsely he cried out his apologies, those departed family members could never hear him again. Yet all of this was still not the end. After committing every possible evil deed, the despicable royal family even framed the Duke's death on Riven. Overnight, that spirited young boy lost everything. He also went from being Fullman's ace, praised by everyone, to becoming a madman reviled by all. The feeling of falling from heaven into hell was nothing more than this. Riven, not yet even 12 years old, was forced to wear shackles weighing hundreds of pounds. He was imprisoned in a pitch-dark basement with no light of day, and this imprisonment lasted for a full 3 years. Every single day and night of those 3 years, he tossed and turned in sleepless, guilt-ridden nightmares, until he met little Tailodi. This innocent and kind girl stumbled by chance into his life. Like a warm little sun, she slowly, little by little, soothed the scars in his heart. Riven truly treated the little princess as his own younger sister. So how could he bear to let the one he treasured most leave his side? But since the girl had a reason she had to go back, then this time, he would be the one to go find her. The young man gently curled his lips into a smile. They would definitely meet again. Meanwhile, the little princess had almost finished resting as well. She once again recited the spell to return home. The surging airflow instantly rose and churned from beneath her feet. The next second, the girl was teleported to another place. She warily looked around, but did not see Loina anywhere. Instead, a strange white-haired man slowly sat up on the bed. So the little princess recited that spell. As long as, at that very moment, someone was thinking of her, she would be able to teleport to that person's side. But the girl never expected that she would be teleported to such a place. The magnificent decorations revealed the noble status of the room's owner. The little princess's heart rose to her throat as well. She mistakenly thought her magic had failed again. So she prepared to quietly slip away before the owner of the room woke up. But the person on the bed suddenly sat up. He pleaded painfully for the girl not to leave. Those affectionate eyes seemed to be looking at someone else through her. The little princess froze on the spot. That familiar white hair and those green eyes. Even though the two had never met, she knew. The person on the bed was her father. In an instant, all her grievances welled up in her chest. She never expected that the person who missed her most would actually be the father who had always ignored her. But what the emperor said next was like a bucket of cold water poured over the little princess's heart. The name the man called was her mother's, so it turned out to be nothing more than her own ridiculous wishful thinking. It seemed that her parents must have loved each other deeply back then, so her father must hate her, the one who had caused her mother's death. She only wanted to escape from the man's side as quickly as possible. In panic, she avoided her father's touch. Using the little magic she had left, she once again recited the teleportation spell. The emperor instinctively drew his sword. The little princess trembled all over in fright. She practically leaped into the spatial rift in a blind panic. Fortunately, this time she was finally teleported to her destination. Meanwhile, the crown prince also sensed the unusual fluctuation of magic. That familiar feeling made him certain that his sister had returned. He could not suppress the trembling of his hands, but in his heart, his emotions became even more tangled and complicated. At this moment, he had no idea how to face the younger sister he had wronged for 10 years. Was he supposed to admit that he was just a sensitive and selfish bastard, and that for the sake of an absurd prophecy, he had hurt the person who cared about him the most, and after doing so many wrong things, still shamelessly tell his sister that he actually loved her? How could he possibly say such words out loud? But in the end, he owed his sister an apology, even if his sister was unwilling to accept it. Even if doing so would cause him to lose his status as crown prince, he still had to give that child an explanation. The man took the initiative to suggest going inside to sit for a while, and after speaking, ignored the maid's objections. He directly barged in. Loina bit her lip in hatred at the side, and the little princess could only reluctantly follow behind. Before long, 4 or 5 grown men had squeezed into the tiny reception room. As soon as the girl sat down, the 2 princes rushed to explain why they had come. The eldest prince asked worriedly where his sister had gone after disappearing, and the second prince anxiously said that they had searched for her very hard these past days. Both of their voices trembled with concern, as if they truly missed the sister they had regained after losing her. The burning emotion in their eyes did not seem fake, yet the little princess uneasily avoided their gazes. The scene of her brothers taking the initiative together to come find her was something she would not even dare dream of. If this had happened in the past, she would have been so happy she could not sleep. But now, her heart was left with only the stillness of dead water. Just as Riven had told her. Back then, she had worked so hard, only because she hoped her family would turn around and look at her once. Even if they gave her only 1/10 of the kindness they gave Lily, she would have treasured it and never let go. But now, she already knew which family members were truly worth giving herself to. The little princess looked straight into her brother's eyes, and the eldest prince was also startled by that resolute and indifferent gaze. The way his sister looked at him was already completely different. The expectation and gentleness she once had were gone. All that remained was coldness and calm. A panic unlike anything he had ever felt before made him regret it so much he could barely breathe. He regretted not cherishing that child who would be satisfied with just a pat on the head, that sister who, even while shivering from the cold, still wanted to leave the blanket for him. Thinking of this, the eldest prince still wanted to say something more. But then he saw blood suddenly seeping from the corner of Loina's mouth, and the little princess rushed over at once without a second thought. Once upon a time, his sister had cared about him in just this way too. Sadly, everything could never go back again. The eldest prince, who had once cruelly hurt his sister, finally regretted it. But the little princess now was unwilling even to call him brother anymore. Loina had only bitten her lip until it bled. Yet the little princess was so heartbroken she was almost in tears. But when facing the brothers who shared her blood, that child was as cold as a stranger. And in that instant, the eldest prince felt as if knives were twisting in his heart. But all of this was their own doing, for once this focused and passionate affection had also belonged to him. His well-behaved little sister would warm him on cold winter nights. She would use her frostbitten little hands to tend his wounds. And after being cruelly hurt, she would still timidly call him brother. But he had personally destroyed all of it, and he did not even dare to remember. To remember those bastard words he had once said. It was he who had forbidden his sister to call him brother, and it was also he who had viciously warned her. If he absolutely had to choose one of the two, sister, he would choose Lily without the slightest hesitation. The more he thought about it, the more the man felt that he had utterly failed as a brother, and his sister's distant attitude also made him feel fear for the very first time. So the eldest prince suddenly stood up. He desperately wanted to prove that he still had a place in his sister's heart. "What should you call me?" The man's voice carried a choking sob, almost like a plea. But in the end, he still did not get the answer he wanted to hear. What his sister called him was "Your Royal Highness the Crown Prince." This was clearly the form of address he had once personally demanded. But now, hearing it in his ears, it was more mocking than the most vicious curse. Yet even so, the man was still unwilling to give up. He deceived himself by saying that they were family bound by blood, that he wanted to hear his sister. But the little princess lowered her head uneasily. The hurt from the past had long since been carved into her bones, and she had long since ceased to be that child who would endure beatings and scolding for just a little bit of candy. She was afraid that everything before her was only a trap, that as soon as she took the bait, her brother would warn her again, like last time, not to indulge in wishful thinking. In the end, the little princess still chose to close off her heart, and the eldest prince was still unable to hear that long-lost word, brother. He was like a defeated rooster. He left his sister's residence in desolation. But the moment he stepped outside, the man painfully clutched his chest. A guard asked him whether he wanted a physician summoned, but the eldest prince merely trembled as he waved his hand. So this was the unbearable agony of having one's sincere heart trampled into the mud. Now, he had finally felt the heartbreak his sister had once suffered. Yet he did not know when that child would ever forgive him. The high priest had already learned that the princes had all gone to their sister's sleeping quarters. If this continued, the matter of him and the head maid embezzling public funds would be exposed. So an even more evil plan came into being. Meanwhile, the head maid had already hurried to the high priest's temple. She tried hard to maintain calm on the surface, but her trembling hands had already betrayed her. Indeed, it was this woman who had secretly embezzled the money. But all of this had been carried out so brazenly only because of the high priest's instructions. She had thought that everything could be done without anyone noticing, but she had not expected that these past few days, the princes would actually begin to care about that unfavored little harbinger of disaster. This time, the head maid was completely flustered. That was why she lowered herself and ran to the temple for help. Unfortunately, the high priest had never intended to help her at all. This greedy woman was nothing more than a tool used to abuse the little princess. Now that the embezzlement plan had been exposed, someone had to come forward as the scapegoat. And right now, he had something even more important to do. It would soon be the annual sacred ceremony. He had to add even more fuel to the public opinion surrounding Princess Lily. As long as the people always believed that the black-haired Tailodi was the symbol of disaster, that person would never have any chance of turning things around. Thinking of this, the high priest in the corner revealed a sinister smile. "You came to me of your own accord." His hand slowly brushed across the rows of forbidden black magic books on the shelf. And an even more insane plan emerged as well. Back then, it was with this same method that he had taken away Tailodi's identity. A fake imperial princess created through alchemy had replaced the true princess who symbolized light. This time, he would surely succeed as well. The dim and murky light fell upon the high priest's twisted face. At this very moment, inside the emperor's council chamber, the man seated in the place of honor was frowning unhappily. Ever since seeing his daughter that night, he had been restless and distracted. That child had actually used the long-lost magic of space, and he also could never forget those eyes that shone like stars. She really looked far too much like her mother. But the more this was true, the less he could accept his daughter's existence. It was the empress who had first betrayed their love, so his ignoring that child seemed somewhat understandable as well. The emperor stubbornly suppressed his guilt toward his daughter, and instead coldly questioned the eldest prince before the hall, asking why he had disobeyed his orders and secretly gone to the empress's palace. Seeing his father suddenly enraged, the eldest prince did not want to defend himself. In his mind flashed the image of his little sister taking care of him. That kind child should not be treated as a dark harbinger of disaster hated by everyone. She should have been a princess treasured in the palm of one's hand and carefully protected. For the first time in his life, the eldest prince talked back to his father. He told the emperor that his sister was not some ominous harbinger of disaster at all. She was just an ordinary child. But the man on the main seat suddenly laughed. From beginning to end, he had never believed in any prophecy about a harbinger of disaster. He had even ordered nearly 90% of the empire's temples demolished when the high priest prophesied the birth of a child of calamity. But how could a child capable of using teleportation magic be ordinary? This time, it was the eldest prince who was stunned. His sister had used spatial magic, which meant that during the days she had disappeared, she had truly left. Then why had she not told him? In an instant, a powerful unease surged into the eldest prince's heart. His sister did not trust him, or rather, no longer regarded him as her brother. At that moment, the man smiled bitterly. Was this not exactly what he had brought upon himself? He had only just now learned that his sister could use magic. So how could he still have the face to hope for that child's forgiveness? Thinking of this, the eldest prince reported everything he had seen and heard over the past few days to the emperor in complete detail, including the dilapidated state of the empress's palace. At this, the emperor was utterly enraged, and at the same time, Endless regret churned in his heart. No matter how much he resented her, she was still his daughter. He immediately ordered that the little princess be invited over. The emperor had always thought that the little princess was living well, so he had favored his other daughter with a clear conscience. He had even poured all the guilt he felt toward little Taylody into Lily, because in his eyes, money was enough to make up for missing paternal love. But what he did not know was that within the inner palace, what kind of situation an unfavored child would face. No one was willing to take care of a disgraced imperial princess, let alone one who was a harbinger of disaster said to bring misfortune. So the maids assigned to her were replaced one after another, until in the end, only Loina remained. And the head maid even took the opportunity to seize the little princess's allowance. From then on, this child, who should have had a life free of want, lived a life worse than that of the servants. And in the blink of an eye, such days lasted for 10 years. 10 years was enough to wear away a child's longing for her family. And by the time the emperor learned the truth, everything was already too late. The little princess now felt only unfamiliarity and fear toward her father. So when the knight placed the emperor's invitation into her hands, the girl's face instantly turned deathly pale. She vaguely remembered that on that night, her father had drawn the sword at his waist. So, was this to sentence her to death for trespassing into the imperial palace at night? Or would he, like her brother, viciously humiliate her, and then mock her with the cruelest words for never being able to compare to Lily? At that moment, the little princess shrank back. Even though she had long prepared herself for not being loved, she still did not want to face such cruel hurt. So the little princess stammered as she searched for an excuse to refuse. And when Loina saw this, her heart ached so badly she could hardly breathe. Her little princess seemed very afraid of the outside world, but that was only natural, for some people's existence simply did not deserve to be called family. Even if they regretted it and wanted to apologize, they were not worthy of being forgiven at all. Unfortunately, the emperor's invitation was something they could not refuse. But the little princess suddenly said that her stomach hurt, seeing her miserably clutch her belly with her little hand. Loina's heart tightened at once, only where the maid could not see. A trace of guilt flashed through the little princess's eyes. This was the first time she had lied to Loina. But if she did not do this, she might really die. And what she had not expected even more was that after learning she was sick, the emperor actually sent over a large pile of healing potions. There were so many bottles that she could not use them all up in an entire year. But little Taylody did not feel the slightest bit of joy. Perhaps her father's concern was only a passing whim, yet she had still completely underestimated a father's determination to see his daughter. For the next 5 days in a row, she received invitations from the emperor. It seemed that she would have to find a time to meet that person after all. For 10 years of neglect, the father desperately wanted to make it up to his daughter. Sadly, the little princess, who had suffered so much grievance, only wanted to run far away. She had long since stopped believing in the family members who had hurt her. A full 10 years, and no one had ever remembered her in that corner. Even on her birthday each year, only Loina stayed by her side. The dazzling fireworks lit up the entire night sky, but not a single one bloomed for her. Even more absurdly, those fireworks had all been prepared for her younger sister, who shared the same birthday. At a very young age, she had already tasted the pain of heartbreak, and as time passed, no one came to help me. These wounds, too, were etched little by little into her bones. So, the little princess finally learned to be obedient. She no longer hoped for her family's care, but she never expected that they would only begin to regret it after losing her. From the very first moment he saw his daughter, little Tylody's figure lingered in the emperor's mind and would not fade. That child reminded him of his dead wife. And after learning of his daughter's miserable life over the past 10 years, guilt quietly took root in the man's heart. As her father, he began trying every possible way to make it up to her. However, the invitations he sent were rejected again and again. Left with no other choice, the emperor could only take advantage of his daughter's kindness. That day, as usual, Ashwin brought another invitation letter from the emperor, and after only one glance at the cover and the dog comic, the little princess was ready to pretend to be sick. But I've already used every place that could hurt today. Now, there really was no excuse left to refuse. So, the girl cast a wronged glance. She asked the knight whether she could choose not to go. She truly did not want to face that biased father. However, Ashwin, kneeling on the ground, hesitated for a moment. Deep down, he did not want the little princess to suffer even the slightest bit more harm. But the emperor's wrath was not something a mere knight could bear. After thinking it over again and again, he ultimately still could not bring himself to speak. Yet the sensitive little princess had already seen the knight's difficulty. As an imperial princess, she could refuse without restraint, but Ashwin could not. Judging by the man's condition, he had probably already been implicated and punished. So she could not selfishly let the people around her suffer in her place. Thinking of this, the little princess suddenly made up her mind. She tried hard to control her trembling hands. Although she was still very afraid of seeing her father, for the sake of those who cared about her, she was willing to overcome the fear in her heart. So, the little princess took Ashwin's hand. At that moment, she found the courage to overcome everything. In fact, avoidance solves nothing. Yet the little princess never imagined that her father truly did love her. And his neglect over these 10 years was only because he hated her mother too much. For 10 years, he ignored his daughter, yet now he tried every possible way to beg for forgiveness. Unfortunately, all the emperor's painstaking attempts at compensation were ultimately futile. The little princess was unwilling even to touch the tea and pastries her father sent. She simply looked at the man coldly like this. When even my life was hard to preserve, just like when my brother forced me to apologize back then, what right do you have? She did not understand why some people always waited until after losing something to feel deep regret. And such compensation would only make people feel sick. At that moment, however, the emperor suddenly revealed a nostalgic expression. He praised the little princess for looking so much like her mother, but in the next second, he recalled too many painful memories from the past. The gentleness in his eyes vanished in an instant. He sadly began to tell the story of his youth. Back then, he too had once deeply loved the little princess's mother, but what all of that brought him in return was the ruthless betrayal of his lover. Only then did the emperor understand that what his wife wanted was merely an heir, and those false vows of eternal love had all been lies. So after his daughter was born, he vented his hatred for his wife onto the child. That was the reason he had been unwilling to see the little princess. He did not want to face the culprit who had destroyed his love. After saying this, the man looked at the little princess with hopeful eyes, wishing to receive his daughter's forgiveness. Yet a mocking sneer appeared on the girl's face. So this was the truth of why she had been abandoned. But what did any of this have to do with her? She could understand the heart-wrenching pain her father felt after being deceived, but she could not pretend to be generous and choose forgiveness. And just then, the appearance of a guard interrupted their conversation. It turned out that the annual noble council was about to begin. The emperor could only prepare to leave unwillingly. Before leaving, he cautiously asked whether his daughter still resented him in her heart. But the little princess shook her head with self-mockery. It was not because she sympathized with her father's tragic love story, but because her heart, already riddled with wounds, no longer longed for familial affection. She already knew who the family worth giving herself to truly were. So whether it was her father's concern or his indifference, she no longer cared. And in the days that followed, the emperor began trying even harder to make it up to his daughter. From his son's mouth, he learned about the embezzlement of her living allowance over the years. In an instant, the guilt in his heart turned into anger. He began a sweeping investigation into the matter. But as the investigation continued to deepen, his heart also grew heavier and heavier, not only because of his daughter's miserable life, but also because this matter unexpectedly brought out the truth behind the queen's betrayal back then. It turned out that everything had been a misunderstanding, and he had personally driven to death the wife who had deeply loved him. He had even nearly caused his daughter to lose her life as well. The emperor finally began thoroughly investigating the truth of that year, and the false imperial princess's identity was about to be exposed as well. It turned out that Lily's biological mother back then was a prostitute temporarily brought in by the high priest. And this woman had no fertility at all. When the emperor was wounded by love, she took advantage of the opportunity, thereby making the emperor believe that Lily was his biological daughter. The man believed this without question and kept her by his side to raise her. But the emperor never could have imagined that this child, who looked 80% like him, was not even human, and this secret would soon be completely exposed at the sacred ceremony. The high priest had originally wanted to use the ceremony to solidify Lily's prestige. At the same time, he wanted her to have a chance to get close to the envoy sent by the Holy Nation. That person was the Pope's only legitimate son, and marrying him meant gaining control of divine authority. So long ago, the high priest had already begun frantically building momentum. He had to make Lily the sole receiver of the divine envoy. Thus, at this noble council, minister after minister proposed that Lily should receive the honored guest. Some even shamelessly praised Lily's outstanding beauty, saying it would surely attract the divine envoy's attention. After all, she was the only light of the Pyrrhisa Empire. The emperor, already tormented by guilt, flew into a rage the moment he heard those words. If Lily was the light, then what did that make his little Tailodi? At once, the previously noisy hall fell silent. The leading minister trembled as he apologized to the emperor. Fortunately, the man seated in the place of honor did not continue pressing the matter. He coldly stated that the task of receiving the guest could be given to Lily, but only if Lily herself was willing. And after that, the emperor did not mention Princess Tailodi again. The others also breathed a slight sigh of relief. What they did not know, however, was that this iron-blooded emperor had already traced the matter to the high priest. He believed that the Pope's legitimate son would be able to distinguish true divine revelation from falsehood and know who the true new star of light was and who was the ominous darkness. Meanwhile, the crown prince was pulling his younger brother along to drink tea together. Both of them were saddened that they had failed to gain their sister's forgiveness. It was said that even their imperial father had begun currying favor with their sister these days. Perhaps he too regretted it, just like they did. Now, the crown prince only hoped that his sister could be happy. Even if he was not forgiven, it did not matter. This was the retribution he deserved. However, another matter that had happened recently gave the two of them an especially severe headache. That was the investigation into the head maid's embezzlement of public funds. The crown prince had checked the accounts line by line himself, but after reviewing everything as a whole, he found not the slightest discrepancy. The people who had hurt his sister were not receiving the punishment they deserved. So the two brothers decided to join forces, determined to seek justice for the little princess who had suffered endless grievance. Both brothers regretted failing to protect their beloved sister, and the people who had harmed the little princess were finally about to pay the price. The eldest prince cast a sharp gaze at the head maid. His voice carried a gloomy chill. Is everything on this expenditure list true? After saying that, he slammed the table hard. The head maid was so frightened on the spot that her legs went weak. At a time like this, if you still lie, you will lose your head. Or is it that you have something else you're hiding? But if she exposed the high priest, she would surely die even more miserably. The woman could already imagine herself being hacked to pieces. She did not dare look into the crown prince's eyes, and could only silently make a desperate gamble. She bet that the high priest had already destroyed all the evidence without leaving a trace. So the head maid loudly declared that the situation was exactly as stated, and the man in the main seat instantly reddened around the eyes. His hand seemed as though it would crush the documents on the table alive. Yet on the surface, he still had to maintain the proper composure. The man forced out a chilling smile. In a stiff tone, he praised the woman for being dutiful and responsible. At present, he had no evidence, but that did not mean he would let these villains who had hurt his sister go. For all the grievances little Teilodi had suffered, he would repay these people 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold. At that moment, the man forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart, as if comforting her, yet also as if warning her. He instructed the woman. Bullying the imperial family carries at the very least the punishment of hanging, so do not do what you should not do. After saying that, the eldest prince was about to let the woman leave. Yet just then, the teacup in the second prince's hand suddenly shattered. The boy's hand was cut until it was covered in blood, yet he seemed unable to feel the pain. His icy gaze was fixed firmly on the head maid. That terrifying look made him seem like an evil ghost from hell. A chill instantly surged into the woman's heart, because she knew this was the second prince's warning to her, and that teacup had clearly been crushed by his own hand. The head maid fled in panic, like a rat crossing the street. Leaning against the door panel, she gasped for breath. It was all that damned ominous imperial princess's fault. Wasn't it just that her life was a bit miserable? And she still had the nerve to complain to the two princes. She should have strangled that little disaster star to death back then. It seemed she had to go discuss the next step of the plan with the high priest. But what she did not know was that her crimes had already been exposed, and countless terrible punishments were waiting for her. In the days that followed, the two princes continued on their path of apologizing, but all of these ingratiating gestures were coldly rejected by their sister. Both of them believed that as long as they kept trying like this, they would surely win back the little princess's heart. But something that happened later completely severed the possibility of reconciliation between the siblings. This time, it was the little princess who misunderstood her two brothers. The eldest prince, filled with regret, did everything he could to make it up to his sister, only to discover that the little princess already had family by her side whom she could rely on. That child no longer needed him, her terrible brother. This realization filled the eldest prince with extreme anguish. If he had seen his own heart sooner, would his sister perhaps not have left him? Sadly, there is no medicine for regret in this world. In the end, that child had still been utterly heartbroken by him. And just then, Ashwin suddenly submitted his resignation request. The eldest prince frowned in confusion. After all, becoming the head of the knights was no easy achievement. Yet the man before him actually intended to give up such a bright future. Then the man solemnly said that he wanted to become the sharpest sword in Her Highness the Imperial Princess's hand. His gentle voice was devout, as if he were on a pilgrimage. The eldest prince froze on the spot. His pale lips moved, yet he could not say a single word. So it turned out that his love for his sister was not even equal to that of a guard who had stayed by her side. At that moment, the man suddenly broke down, like a child who had done something wrong. He refused to admit his mistake, yet he stubbornly hoped that Ashwin would change his mind. That way, at least, he himself would not seem quite so unbearable. However, the young knight merely curled his lips calmly. He knew very well what he would lose, but compared with the little princess's happiness, all of this outward fame was nothing more than passing clouds. After saying that, the man lifted his eyes with a resolute gaze, and the eldest prince slumped back into his seat. He had lost, and lost completely, so the repentance he had thought so heartfelt had actually been that insignificant. He had clearly resolved to strive for his sister's forgiveness, yet had never even possessed the determination to give up his status. At that moment, the man let out a self-mocking bitter laugh. No wonder that child still refused to forgive him even now. It seemed that what he had done was still far from enough. But at present, he still had things he absolutely had to accomplish. The eldest prince pulled out a thick stack of documents from the drawer, and these were all substitute maids he had carefully selected. Their loyalty was absolutely guaranteed. They would certainly prevent the evil act of embezzling childcare funds from happening again. Just a few days earlier, the eldest prince had sent her a group of carefully selected maids. The little princess warmly received them, yet the maids still remained timid and cautious. Rumors had always spread outside that this black-haired princess was an ominous disaster star. Moreover, she was said to be a very difficult master to serve. Throughout the palace, people said she was overbearing and rude, and often bullied her kind younger sister. Some time ago, there had even been a huge uproar over a hairpin snatching incident, so the maids were so nervous that they did not dare raise their heads. And Loina at the side was already flushed with anger. Although she had long known that her little princess was unwelcome in the palace, that still was no reason for the eldest prince to humiliate her so wantonly, sending over a few plain and unimpressive girls. Wasn't that obviously meant to disgust people on purpose? Just as she was about to vent her anger on these newly arrived maids, she saw the little princess walk over with a smile. Her friendly manner carried not the slightest bit of princess arrogance. In no time, she became familiar with the new maids. Everyone was surprised to find that Her Highness the Imperial Princess was completely different from the rumors, and their interactions afterward completely overturned their understanding even more. The well-behaved little princess often helped them with household chores within her ability, and that mature and sensible demeanor only made people ache for her even more. In just a few days, the girl had already won everyone's favor. However, there was one thing that gave the little princess a terrible headache. It was the burn scars on the twin sisters' faces. She had already brought them the most effective scar removal ointment, yet it still could not erase the ugly scars on their faces. The sisters said that even the high priest's holy water had no effect on them. Only the legendary healing magic had a chance of removing them completely. Unfortunately, this miraculous spell had already been lost 1,000 years ago. As they spoke, the sisters revealed expressions of despair, and the little princess bit her lower lip in conflict. She did not know whether she should help these pitiful sisters, because she had promised Loina that she would not reveal the fact that she could use magic. Yet in the end, the kindness in her heart still triumphed over everything. The little princess returned to her room and began deciphering those obscure spells, began deciphering those obscure incantations. The complicated text left the little princess utterly exhausted, leaving her almost unable to keep her eyes open. But she still gritted her teeth and persevered relentlessly. Fortunately, the final result did not disappoint the effort she had put in. She finally found the magic that could heal the twin sisters. So on a dark and windy night, the little princess brought the two sisters to a secluded garden. At first, the younger sister protested in disbelief and near collapse, but when the girl in white was enveloped in holy light at that moment, both she and her sister were completely stunned. In an instant, she thought she had seen an angel descend, and the next second, those uneven scars miraculously disappeared. The sisters looked at each other in disbelief. Their tear-filled eyes were full of gratitude toward Her Royal Highness the Princess. But no one noticed that in the corner stood a richly dressed young man, and under his breath, he was murmuring softly. This was the true light, right in front of her brother. The scheming younger sister immediately revealed her evil true colors. She arrogantly believed that she was the incarnation of light, yet she did not know that her identity as the child of darkness was already becoming impossible to hide. These past few days, little Taylodi had been busy refusing her brother's apologies. Meanwhile, Lily was preparing for the sacred festival a few days later. She changed into a spotless white gown, and her feigned innocence made her look like an angel who had wandered into the mortal world. She could not wait to use her beauty to get close to the envoy from the Holy Nation. However, the heavens did not seem to cooperate. From early morning on, the pouring rain had never stopped. The girl stared at the terrible weather in displeasure, and the maid at her side hurriedly explained in a flattering tone. She praised the divine envoy who was about to arrive as a uniquely handsome man, and if he stood beside the princess, they would surely be a match made in heaven. Even the heavens were so jealous that they were unwilling to let them meet. Hearing this, Lily immediately lifted her chin proudly. After all, in the entire Pyresa Empire, no one was more suitable than her to appear on such an occasion, especially not her black-haired sister. With that shabby appearance of hers, she was not even worthy of the title of Imperial Princess. Unlike herself, who not only possessed unparalleled beauty, but also an incomparably noble status. Only the sole heir of the Holy Nation was worthy of becoming her husband. The more the girl thought about it, the more excited she became, and her expression became even more twisted under the flashes of lightning. She was going to first take the divine envoy to visit the lily garden her brother had given her. After all, nothing was more sacred than something eternal and unchanging. Meanwhile, the divine envoy had already stepped down from his carriage. From the moment he entered the palace, he had smelled a decaying aura, and combined with those rumors, the prophecy of darkness devouring light, made it hard for him not to think of the child of darkness who would bring disaster. In the young man's heart, waves of unease faintly arose, but he still continued toward the lily garden where Lily was. Only, the closer he got, the stronger the aura of darkness became. And when he saw Lily, who looked like a lily flower, with his own eyes, he became absolutely certain that the girl before him was the true darkness. The ominous aura of death on her made people instinctively want to flee. At the same time, the young men also sensed another sacred power. Though remote and faint, It possessed a tenacious vitality. The young man could not help but follow it, and he witnessed a scene he would never forget for the rest of his life. Holy white light wrapped around the beautiful girl like a butterfly's cocoon, and from her lips came the soft murmur of an ancient spell. The next second, tiny lights slowly emerged from beneath her feet, and the night sky, like a brilliant sea of stars, was illuminated as brightly as day. Using sacred magic that had been lost for over 1,000 years, she healed the girl before her. This was the true light foretold in the prophecy. At that moment, he found the meaning of the rest of his life. The dark imperial princess, regarded as an ill omen, had actually cast sacred magic that had been lost for 1,000 years. A vast sea of stars spread outward from beneath her feet. In an instant, it dispelled the boundless darkness. Tiny halos of light drifted down like stars. With only the gentlest touch, they could give people the power to heal their wounds. The twin sisters beside her were already completely speechless. They had not even noticed the changes on each other's faces. Only when the little princess stopped chanting the spell did they look at each other in disbelief. Those ugly scars, like a nightmare, had really disappeared. At that moment, the sisters embraced and wept with joy, and the little princess also revealed a relieved expression. None of the three noticed the young man hiding in the corner. Little did they know that he had already taken in the shocking scene completely. So this was the true light. No wonder he had smelled the rotting aura on Lily. That meant the prophecy had been wrong from the very beginning. Yet even burdened with the most vicious stigma in the world, that well-behaved child still preserved the kindness in her heart. The young man admitted that he had fallen for her, but then he heard the little princess ask the maids to keep tonight's events a secret for her. Perhaps this child was still hiding some unspeakable secret. The young man also decided to secretly observe her for a few more days. In the blink of an eye, it was the next morning, but the girl had been tormented by overwhelming guilt all night long. She had promised Lowena that she would no longer use magic, yet in the end, she still broke her word out of embarrassment. Then she should return the magic book, and also the cloak her second brother had given her. Although she felt somewhat reluctant in her heart, reason told her that it was time to let go. Perhaps this was a chance to start over with her brothers. So the little princess walked nervously toward the office. She had kept both of these items with the utmost care. She had polished the cover of the magic book until it shone like new, and the heavy cloak had also been neatly folded by her. Perhaps her brothers would not care about such trivial things, but that was all right. During these days since returning, she had already learned to make peace with the past. Hatred would only add to each other's troubles in vain, so she could not bring herself to hate her brothers. The way things were now was actually not so bad. She did not expect her brothers to cherish her the way they cherished Lily. As long as they occasionally still remembered that they had a younger sister like her, that would be enough. Holding on to this lingering attachment, the girl raised her little hand to knock on the door. However, the faint sound of conversation coming from inside the room made her heart suddenly seize up. Her brothers were actually talking about her, but the next second, the content of their conversation made her feel as if she had fallen into an icy abyss. That cloak she had regarded as a treasure. That cloak she had been unwilling to cover herself with even when she was shivering from the cold. To her brothers, it was merely trash casually thrown away. They thought she was dirty. So the memory she had carefully cherished all this time had only been a self-deceiving joke. At that moment, it felt as if someone had clenched the girl's heart viciously. Even the simplest breath carried the pain of despair. What exactly was she still hoping for? A bitter, self-mocking expression appeared on the girl's face. Then she threw down the things and ran away without looking back. The only chance for their little sister to forgive them. Both brothers had completely missed it. The sound of something falling came from outside the door. The second prince's heart fell into chaos as well. Just moments ago, he had told a lie against his true feelings. He said that he thought his sister was dirty. Those hurtful words slipped out of his mouth. The young man felt as though his heart were being cut by knives. How could he possibly despise his sister? She was his only bond in this life. But ever since childhood, everything that belonged to him had been taken away by his older brother. His mother's favoritism, Lily's affection, even the magic talent he had been born with. Not a single thing had truly belonged to him. So when his elder brother asked about their sister, he was afraid. He was afraid his brother would take away his only treasure. That was why he said those self-deceiving lies. He obsessively believed that this way, his sister would belong only to him. But the moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. He comforted himself by thinking he was only deceiving his elder brother, but he had never expected that at that very moment, his obedient little sister was standing at the door. He could not see the lost and devastated look on his sister's face, and so he did not know that there was no longer any possibility for their sibling bond to continue. When the door was pushed open, lying on the ground was the cloak he had given away. There were still tear marks on it that had not yet dried. No, it could not be such a coincidence, but his trembling hands betrayed him. The second prince had never hated himself as much as he did now. He immediately ran in panic toward his sister's chambers. The eldest prince, equally worried, hurried after him, but neither of them had expected to be stopped outside the door by the maids. And the younger sister, who had softened again and again, had, this time, completely given up hope. What right did her shameless brothers have to beg for her forgiveness? For 10 years, they had coldly ignored her without a word. Then, after remembering her, they toyed with her emotions by turning hot and cold, as if she were merely a toy to pass the time. But why? She could feel hurt too. and her heart could ache too, just because she was not their beloved Lily. Did that give them the right to trample a sincere heart into the mud? At this moment, the little princess thought of Riven. The one who truly loved her would never bear to make her sad, and the gifts sent by the princes only made her feel sick. So in the days that followed, no matter how bitterly her two brothers begged, little Taylody merely kept her door shut and refused to see them with cold indifference. Meanwhile, the divine envoy from the Holy Kingdom took the initiative to request an audience with the king. The high priest had thought he was very satisfied with Lily's performance. However, the moment the young man spoke, he requested that the empire change its guide. He tactfully expressed his dissatisfaction with Princess Lily. He even took the initiative to recommend little Taylody, who lived in the queen's palace. When the ministers heard this news, they were all shocked, and the one who reacted most intensely was none other than the high priest standing nearby. He interrupted the envoy's request in grief and indignation. He even brought up that old line about a heaven-fated star of disaster. Such words quickly won the minister's agreement, but they were coldly interrupted by the man seated in the place of honor. He looked down at everyone with lofty disdain. Then he agreed to the envoy's request. The high priest trembled with rage in the corner, but he could do nothing against the emperor's order. So this vicious man came up with another scheme. Little did he know that the ugly look on his face had already been completely seen by the young man behind him. The aura around this person was just as evil as Princess Lily's, like some kind of ominous sacrifice draped in human skin. It seemed that all the truth was about to be revealed. He was very much looking forward to the moment when the identity of the Princess of Light would be exposed. The regretful brothers chased after their sister overnight, but the little princess's heart had already stopped loving completely. She quietly watched this performance of guilt, and in her silent eyes there was only the numbness of despair. She should have cried. She should have cursed those despicable brothers at the top of her lungs. But for some reason, she was even calmer than she had imagined, as if after having been full of hope, she had then been utterly disappointed. A heart that had been wounded to the core no longer wanted to give her brothers even a single chance. The second prince parted his lips as if wanting to speak, then stopped himself. But after meeting his sister's cold gaze, the young man dejectedly lowered his proud head. In a dry voice, he flusteredly explained everything that had happened that day. He had never thought that his sister would just so happen to be standing at the door, and all those hurtful words had been lies spoken against his true feelings. "I'm sorry," the second prince repeated in a murmur. But in the face of the truth, such pale apologies seemed so powerless. At this moment, the little princess laughed at herself mockingly. Even at a time like this, they were still putting on a false show and begging for her forgiveness. Didn't they know that tears of remorse were the cheapest of all? The girls silently rejected the second prince's apology. And looking at this familiar scene, the eldest prince was left with nothing but endless regret. There was once a time when his little sister would sweetly call him brother. She would place the only quilt over him. He was the one who had destroyed all of that beauty with his own hands. But by the time he truly woke up to it, everything was already too late. But even so, he still wanted to make up for what he owed in the past. So he ordered his subordinate to bring out a brand new magic book. The eldest prince stubbornly presented this expensive gift. Then he turned and left in a flustered retreat. They deceived themselves into believing that this way, they could avoid their sister's rejection, but they did not know that doing so would only invite even deeper disgust. Her brothers were still as arbitrary and overbearing as before, but none of this had anything to do with her anymore. That child who longed to be loved had been left in the past forever. No matter how much her brothers pleaded and tried to win her favor from now on, they would never again be able to mend this sibling bond filled with regret. They were the ones who had snapped the blooming rose with their own hands, so they had no right to question why the flower had withered. In the blink of an eye, it was already the eve of the holy celebration. During these days, Lily had been busy trying to attract the divine envoy's attention, but the young man's thoughts had all fallen on little Taylody. That day, he once again sneaked into the girls' courtyard as usual, but unexpectedly, he ran right into the little princess, who was planting vegetables. When the girl looked up, she saw a scene she would never forget for the rest of her life. The handsome young man was like a deity stepping out of an oil painting. Merely standing there made people want to bow in devotion. She remembered the blushing, excited discussions of the maids from the previous days. So this was that noble prince from the Holy Kingdom. Yet in the very next second, the little princess's expression froze on her face, because the young man told her that he had seen the holy magic from that night. In front of everyone, the divine envoy had actually given his one and only token of love to the prophesied star of calamity. At this moment, the high priest's lie collapsed instantly. Even the ministers began to reassess the little princess's identity, but only little Taylody herself was still kept in the dark. She did not know what the bond ribbon truly represented. Just a few days earlier, the prince of the Holy Kingdom had suddenly come to visit. The moment he spoke, he asked about her holy magic. A wave of panic rose in the little princess's heart for no reason. She could not bear to break the hard-won peace she had now. Although life in the queen's palace could not be called prosperous, it was still better than that period of time when everyone had forgotten her. She had already started to fear pain. For those who were not favored, even breathing was a mistake. She was afraid that if she went back, what awaited her would once again be humiliating disgrace. It would be the glaring favoritism that made one suffocate. It would be the tenderness that she could never win, no matter how hard she tried. But looking at this young man who seemed like a god descending to earth, the girl could not say even half a lie to defend herself. His gaze was far too clear and penetrating, as if all filth had nowhere to hide under his eyes. So she had no choice but to sit down and discuss it with His Highness. Could he keep secret the fact that she knew magic? The young man smiled and gently agreed. Then he even reached out his hand, asking to pinky swear with the little princess as proof. At this moment, little Tailodi hesitated. She was a symbol of darkness, the source of misfortune, a disaster so tainted that even her family found her filthy and detestable. Would someone as holy as His Highness really be willing to touch her? She curled her uneasy fingertips inward awkwardly, but in the next second, a beautiful ribbon had already been wound around her little finger. The golden lace looked strikingly like the young man's dazzling blonde hair. He told the little princess that this was a unique custom where he came from, but he concealed the most crucial point. In his entire life, a divine envoy would tie only one ribbon, and the person who received it was the girl with whom he wished to spend the rest of his life. While the little princess was still in a daze, the young man had already turned and left without a sound. Before leaving, he looked back deeply once at this girl who made people's hearts ache. I hope that the next time we meet, you will say my name. And that very afternoon, the news that the divine envoy had given away a ribbon spread through the palace like wildfire. The maids reported the rumor they had heard to Lily. The girl's delicate face instantly twisted, because she was clearly the symbol of light. She was the one most worthy of that noble prince, and her ominous older sister should have rotted in the mud like vermin. She must have seduced the divine envoy on her own initiative. The girl speculated to herself, using the most vicious hatred to shape the image of her sister in her mind. At this moment, the seed of jealousy grew wildly in her heart. She could not wait to humiliate her sister once again. That person still had not seen the new hairpin father gave her, right? She eagerly anticipated the devastated expression her sister would show after seeing it. After suffering endless grievances, the little princess finally discovered her own origins. It turned out that in this world, there really had been one person who had loved her deeply. That day, Loena's father suddenly entered the palace. Without explanation, he handed her an old diary. He told the little princess that this was something left behind by the queen. Along with it was a well-preserved hairpin. The man had promised the queen that after the little princess had grown up, he would personally return it to her. But there was a magical seal left on the diary. It could only be unlocked in a specific environment. So that very night, the little princess came to her mother's room. The clean tabletop was spotless. At a glance, it was obvious that Loena had carefully cleaned it. Sometimes she would also wonder, when her mother was alive, she must have been a gentle and beautiful person. Otherwise, how could so many people have been willing to follow her? Sadly, as her daughter, she was a baleful star despised by everyone. She had implicated her mother and made her bear the stigma of calamity together with her. Everyone said it was her ominous fate that had caused the queen's death. So it would have been better if she had never been born. Then everyone could have had a happy ending, and she would not have had to endure that vile malice alone. Thinking of this, tears silently fell onto the cover of the diary. In an instant, dazzling white light enveloped the entire room. The little princess was drawn into a magnificent dream. It was Rebecca's memory. The lively young girl ran toward the young emperor, and in the man's deep eyes was an inexpressible tenderness. He softly scolded the girl for running more slowly, but in his low, husky voice, there was nothing but worry and doting affection. The man gently touched the girl's belly. In his eyes, the little princess saw happiness. It was the pride of becoming a father for the first time. It was endless longing for the future. It was also an emotion she had never seen in her father's eyes. So she too had once been awaited in this world. She saw her mother coyly push her father away. Then she softly began talking to the unborn her. Their love was so real. In each other's eyes, there was only the other's reflection. But if that was really the case, why had father hated mother so much? She still remembered the resentment she had heard when she first met the emperor. He had said that every night he dreamed the nightmare of being abandoned by his beloved, and the source of the tragedy was little Tylodi's birth. At that time, there had been only hardship and pain in father's eyes. But at this moment, huge cracks appeared throughout the dream. By the time the little princess came back to her senses, the scene had already shifted to another setting. Mother's belly had grown large and round, but on her face, there remained only gloomy clouds of sorrow. Loena asked her why she was deliberately distancing herself from the emperor. Then the young woman murmured painfully in a low voice that she did not want to do this either. But in the future, she had glimpsed her deeply beloved husband would kill their child with his own hands. And the only way now was to stay away. The young girl forced a bleak smile. She herself did not know whether what she was doing was right or wrong, but she could not stand by and watch her only daughter be hurt, and at some point, the little princess beside her was already streaming with tears. She wanted to rush forward and hug her mother, even if only once. But the woman's gentle smile slowly faded away in the white light, and the dream came to an abrupt end at that very moment. At this point, the seal on the diary was completely broken, and through those sorrowful words, The little princess gradually caught a glimpse of the misunderstanding from those years. All because of a misunderstanding, the emperor heartlessly abandoned his pregnant wife. He did not even give her a chance to explain. The man fell for someone else at the very moment his wife needed him most. The little princess turned through her mother's diary page by page. Even if there were only a few brief lines, she could still feel the sorrow hidden between the words. Her mother gently recorded her growth, every movement in her womb, every heartbeat. Even though the days of pregnancy were far from easy, her mother still looked forward immensely to her daughter's birth, until she learned from a maid that the emperor had already found a new lover without her knowledge. All happiness came to an abrupt end at that moment. The later diary entries gradually became shocking to read, and she seemed to see her mother growing thinner day by day. And that damned father of hers was holding a new lover in his arms when his wife needed him most. At that moment, the little princess felt both anger and sorrow. More than that, what she felt was a deep helplessness. It would have been better if she had never been born, but at the very end, the girl suddenly found peace. That was the gentle apology her mother had left for her. "I'm sorry, my child, but I have never regretted giving birth to you. You are the most precious treasure of my life." The crooked, uneven handwriting looked just like a final message left before death. Yet between every line was her mother's love for her. She gently closed the diary in her hands. The little princess's sorrow still could not calm down for a long time. Even now, her father still stubbornly resented her mother's distance. And even more laughable was this: her younger sister, that child born to the new lover, was actually born in the same year as her. The girl felt that her mother had not been worth such treatment, but what she wanted to do even more was make her father, after learning the truth, regret it completely. Meanwhile, on the other side, the scheming little sister had already begun a new round of troublemaking. Soon, the little princess received an invitation letter sent by her sister, but rather than an invitation, it was more like an order. Every line revealed a nauseating arrogance. Loina exploded with anger on the spot. She indignantly stood up for her little mistress, but the girl merely smiled and shook her head. She had long stopped caring about this kind of petty struggle for affection, whether it was her brothers or her father. If her sister wanted to pick up all that favor, then she could take it all. But she would definitely attend this afternoon tea. She wanted to tell her sister personally not to keep doing these meaningless things to fight for attention. So the little princess put on the hairpin her mother had left her. But she did not expect that her sister had set her sights on her belongings once again. And not only did her father not stop it, he flew into a rage at her. In front of her two brothers, the scheming little sister began bullying her older sister again. She deliberately blurred the content of the invitation. Her purpose was to make her sister embarrass herself at the banquet. Only after the little princess arrived did she realize her father and brothers had already been waiting by the long table for quite some time. The lavish arrangement did not look like an ordinary afternoon tea at all. Everyone was dressed in exquisite and luxurious formal wear, and Lily had changed into the most extravagant one of all. She warmly greeted her uneasy older sister, using a hypocritical smile to hide her smug expression. Meanwhile, the little princess nervously twisted her fingers. Dressed so poorly, she was completely out of place amid the splendor of the scene, and the scrutinizing gazes of the crowd pressed down on her until she could hardly breathe. She had clearly already decided not to fight or compete, so why was no one still willing to let her go? The girl tried hard to suppress her trembling body, but the scheming little sister's performance had only just begun. In a sickly sweet tone, she began praising the hairpin her sister had newly put on. That tone was exactly the same as last time in the lily garden. Could it be that she wanted to take it for herself again? The little princess instantly tensed her stiff body, but the emperor at the seat of honor suddenly stood up, and in a fury he demanded to know where his daughter had stolen the hairpin from. His sinister gaze looked as if it wanted to tear someone apart alive. But at that moment, the little princess suddenly was no longer afraid. Clearly, neither her mother nor she had done anything wrong. Why should they bear these baseless accusations? Thinking of this, the little princess looked straight into the emperor's eyes. She told her father that this was the only thing her mother had left her. Yet upon hearing those words, the emperor muttered in disbelief under his breath. He did not believe that the empress still kept the gift he had given her, just as he did not believe that Rebecca still deeply loved him until her death. The man's stunned expression looked as though he had suffered a tremendous shock, but the little princess only gave a mocking smile. Who exactly was this belated affection supposed to be performed for? Even if her mother's spirit still lingered in heaven, she would only find it disgusting. Then she coldly glanced at her brothers beside her. Both of them guiltily averted their eyes. Seeing this scene, the little princess only found it absurd beyond measure. They kept saying they loved her, but when her hands were covered in chilblains and she had nearly frozen to death, where were they? When she was mocked by her sister, when she was made to suffer by her father, where were they? At that moment, the little princess finally made up her mind completely. Expressionless, she announced to everyone that since no one could tolerate her, then from this day forward, she would never again step out of the empress's palace. And the heavy vow rang out with unmistakable force, causing her father and brothers to panic for no reason. Their guilt nearly overflowed from their hearts. They stumbled over their words as they tried to explain to the little princess, saying that no one hated her. But the girl calmly said, "No, I hate all of you." At that moment, everyone's convictions collapsed with a crash. At that moment, everyone's convictions collapsed with a crash. The girl's words tore apart the self-righteous dignity they had clung to. The eldest prince opened his mouth as if he wanted to speak, but stopped himself. But as he looked at his younger sister's utterly detached gaze, an inexplicable fear swallowed him in an instant. He was wrong. He had always thought he still had a chance to win his sister back, but only at that moment did he finally understand that little tagalong who had once stuck close behind him would never come back again. Only a narrow, long table stood between them, but his sister's resolute departing figure made it seem as though they would never meet again in this lifetime. Tears of regret silently slipped down through his fingers, but all of that no longer had anything to do with the little princess. On the road ahead, the sunlight was just right, and the girl's steps unconsciously became lighter. It was just that she had not expected the divine envoy to suddenly ask about that painful past. The little princess had finally broken completely with her family of the past. Once upon a time, she too had unconditionally chased after the backs of her brothers, begging for that trace of concern that had never belonged to her. But now, she no longer needed it. 10 years of neglect were enough to make a heart full of expectation fall silent bit by bit, not to mention that what her brothers brought her had never been anything but injury again and again. Clearly, they lived so close. If they had only walked a few more steps, they could have seen her at her most helpless, seen the worn hem of her dress, seen her miserable plight. Yet for a full 10 years, they had never stepped into her courtyard. So the little princess waited all alone in the courtyard. She waited until the blooming flowers had all withered away, until the clean tabletop was covered in dust. In that waiting filled with scarcity, she passed through her entire childhood. And now, she would return that despair to them twofold. She wanted them to taste what it felt like not to be favored. The sincerity she had offered had been trampled into the mud. Her earnest confessions had been treated as lies. The little princess had waited a full 10 years. So when her brothers shamelessly asked her how they could earn her forgiveness, she bluntly said that they should wait 10 years first. But what she truly thought in her heart was that the two brothers should live forever in guilt. Thinking of the stunned and regretful expressions on their faces when she left, the girl happily began humming a little tune. But in the eyes of the divine envoy, this scene looked exactly like forced cheerfulness. He softly comforted the little princess, telling her not to be sad. But the girl only shook her head indifferently. She truly no longer cared. Those people were not worth her feelings. And besides, the prophecy that she was a bringer of disaster had long become known to everyone. She had long since grown used to living alone. The little princess lifted her small face in feigned strength. Yet she did not know that this only made people feel even more sorry for her. As if driven by some mysterious impulse, the boy asked the question that had weighed on his heart for a long time. He wanted to know whether the girl hated the gods who had delivered that prophecy, and by extension hated him, a divine envoy. But the little princess hurriedly waved her hands and said that she did not hate them. Hatred was the most useless emotion in the world, and the divine envoy was an especially kind and good person. Hearing that, the boy finally let out a quiet sigh of relief. Yet for no reason, a trace of disappointment rose in his heart. So he was only a kind and good person, but that was fine too. He was willing to silently protect the little princess's happiness. After that, he told the girl that she did not need to care about the contents of the prophecy. In his eyes, she would always be the incarnation of light. The little princess was amused into laughter by this gentle comfort, and she also thought of another person, that black-haired older brother in the neighboring country. She wondered how he had been doing these days, whether he had removed those handcuffs that symbolized restraint in order to protect the little princess he loved. Riven, far away in the neighboring country, had actually decided to rebel. He had never imagined that that dirty little girl would be the empire's princess, nor had he ever imagined that that obedient and sensible child would be treated as a dark harbinger of disaster. She was clearly so kind, yet this world had never treated her kindly. So Riven wanted to become stronger. He wanted to become someone that even the empire could not shake. That way, he could openly clear the little princess's name. So the boy took the initiative to come before the crown prince. He intended to set off a bloody rebellion. The country of today had long since become rotten and decayed. The people needed a wise new king, and he also needed an identity strong enough, an identity powerful enough to shield the little princess from wind and rain. Then, Riven pushed the list of spies in front of the crown prince. He knew that once he took this step, there would be no turning back. But he could not bear to let the little princess continue suffering in the empire. Perhaps after failure, what awaited him would be cruel punishment. But he did not care in the slightest. Last time, it was little Taelodi who gave him salvation in the darkness. Then this time, he would be the one to take her away. Meanwhile, in the royal palace of Pyresa, the little princess's current situation was not safe. The high priest once again summoned the head maid of the north with the purpose of having little Taelodi quietly eliminated in secret, and a cruel sneer hung on the man's face. If anyone was to blame, It was that willful little princess for refusing to listen to advice. If she had obediently stayed in her place as a bringer of disaster, he might even have mercifully spared her life. But now, her existence had already shaken Lily's status. Then she absolutely could not be left alive. The high priest ordered the head maid to keep a close eye on the movements of the Empress's palace and to act immediately once an opportunity appeared. But the woman suddenly spoke in anger. It turned out that in a few more days, the emperor was planning to place the 5th Knights under little Tylodi's name, and that had originally belonged only to the Princess of Light, the royal family's personal guard. At once, the high priest's eyes darkened. And then he coldly said, "Darkness had always been like this, doing everything it could to devour everything around it. So we must protect the noble princess Lily even more." The head maid nodded in agreement as if brainwashed, without knowing that this was actually an even deeper scheme of the high priest. It turned out that from the moment of her birth, the Princess of Light had never been injured, because her blood was a strange green. To make up for what he owed his daughter, the regret-filled emperor came to the little princess's door overnight to apologize. He waited carefully outside the door. His troubled eyes were full of urgency. A neatly arranged procession stood behind him as well. These were the gifts he had specially prepared as compensation for his daughter. When the little princess walked out of the bedchamber, the knights immediately lined up under the emperor's orders to welcome her. The grand scene was completely out of place with the desolate courtyard. The girl quietly watched everyone's performance as if she were watching clowns. On her expressionless face was a coldness unfitting for her age. What should she do now? Should she be moved to tears with gratitude for the gift her father deigned to give her, or calmly accept this cheap apology? Was this the only way for them to soothe their guilt with a clear conscience? Using self-righteous apologies to whitewash those cruel injuries. But the little princess simply did not want to forgive. No one could give her back 10 years of happiness, and no one could make up for her lonely childhood. Those miserable and sorrowful days were all branded deeply into her soul, like a searing mark. What's more, she had no right to forgive in her mother's place. So the little princess coldly refused her father's gift. Her distant attitude viciously pierced the man's heart. At a loss, he asked his daughter, hadn't they agreed before not to hold a grudge? Yet when the emperor saw the hairpin by the little princess's ear, he seemed to suddenly realize something. He murmured Rebecca's name to himself. A barely restrained madness gradually surfaced in his eyes. He even threw the sword in his hand to the ground, heedless of his dignity. The man nearly begged as he held his daughter's shoulders. He wanted to know what else his wife had left behind before her death. Seeing this familiar scene, the little princess only found it incomparably ridiculous. What a deeply devoted, perfect husband. Where was he when mother was giving birth alone? Where was he when she herself was starving and freezing, nearly dying? And now he wanted to put on an act as if he wanted to die. As though mother, who had passed away leaving him behind, were the sinner who had betrayed their love. Then let him repent to his heart's content. Although the little princess did not want the emperor to profane her mother's belongings, she wanted even more to see the man's regret and pain. A misunderstanding that could have been cleared up with just a few more questions. Yet it caused a couple who should have been happy to miss each other for a lifetime. In the end, they simply had not loved each other enough. She had someone bring her mother's diary. Then she solemnly placed it in her father's hands. At last, the emperor found the truth from those years in the diary. It turned out that the empress he had hated for a lifetime had loved him deeply from beginning to end. As that bloody past was uncovered little by little, the man's heart was driven to the utmost agony. The word regret was far from enough to describe his despair at this moment. He even began to think about dying. If he died, would he be able to atone for his past self? Would he then receive his wife's gentle forgiveness? The emperor kept tormenting himself with these thoughts, while being so heartbroken that it felt as if knives were twisting in his chest. He still could not bear to miss a single detail in the diary. Tears of remorse blurred his vision. Like a trapped beast, he let out a defeated and helpless roar. A deathly silence spread through the courtyard, and only after a long time did the man barely manage to raise his hand. After a long while, the man barely managed to lift his hand. He wanted to touch their child, but the little princess quietly avoided him without a trace. At that moment, the emperor laughed at himself. Sure enough, this was all retribution. He looked at the daughter before him in remorse, wanting to find even the slightest comfort from her, like a form of salvation. But the girl coldly told him to take the entire knight order away. She did not need compensation in any form, but she would also never forgive. These so-called attempts to make amends only made her feel sick. She also told her father to return the diary as soon as possible. For it to remain in his hands for even one more second was an insult to mother. The little princess's gaze was resolute and cold, and her distant attitude shut out her father's overtures. But the emperor did not give up because of this. Even if his daughter hated him, having lost his wife, he could no longer afford to lose this last remaining treasure. So he announced to the little princess in a commanding tone, if his daughter refused to accept the protection of the Knight Order, then he would let this group of guards be cast out onto the streets. Those threatening words only aroused even deeper disgust in the little princess. But kind-hearted as she was, she ultimately still accepted her father's gift. Time flew by, and soon it was a week later. The little princess's life returned to its former peace. Neither her brother nor her father came to disturb her. The girl greatly enjoyed her life now. But during this time, an unpleasant little incident also occurred. The purple-haired maid discovered the little princess's secret of being able to use magic. For the revival of her family, she prepared to spread this matter. Fortunately, before the plan could be carried out, it was discovered in time by the twin sisters. But this also became a hidden danger by the little princess's side that could explode at any moment. Meanwhile, the divine envoy of the Holy Kingdom was also about to leave. His purpose in coming to the Empire had been for the activities of the Holy Festival. Now the ceremony had already ended. He came to say a final goodbye to the little princess. Perhaps the next time they met, it would be several years later. He wanted to take this opportunity to confess his feelings to the girl. The bond ribbon that could only be given away once in a lifetime was unknowingly given by the little princess to the prince of the Holy Kingdom. The young man came happily to the girl's bedchamber, only to discover that almost every guard here had a ribbon. It seemed that the little princess had only treated the ribbon as an ordinary gift. A wave of disappointment rose uncontrollably in the young man's heart. But when he thought that the next meeting would not be until 5 years later, he still gathered his courage and walked up to the little princess. Blushing, he gently told her how he felt. For the first time, an embarrassed flush appeared on his fair face. His affectionate eyes were filled with persistent and burning love. The moment the little princess looked up, she saw the black ribbon he wore close to his body. The beautiful bow hung from his collar down to his chest, as if silently declaring how important the girl was to him. The little princess's heart began to pound uncontrollably. At this moment, she did not know how to respond either. She thanked His Highness for taking care of her these past few days, but that was still far from enough for them to become intimate lovers. She had seen too much of the way her father and mother tormented each other, and had long since stopped expecting anything from love. The little princess awkwardly shifted her embarrassed gaze away. The young man immediately understood and changed the subject. He told the girl that he should return to his country. Looking at the little princess's reluctant eyes, he secretly swore in his heart that one day, he would clear the little princess's foul stigma. Even if the price was to defy the god he served, he would never care. That very night, the young man boarded the departing carriage. Only many years later did the girl learn that a divine envoy's bond ribbon could only be given to one person, but what was missed in youth was, in the end, still missed. Meanwhile, Riven had already helped the crown prince successfully seize power. They eliminated the foolish emperor and established an entirely new regime in that barren little kingdom. The young man led the army in campaigns everywhere. With every neighboring small kingdom he annexed, he felt that he was one step closer to the little princess. And so, everything gradually got back on track. But danger quietly lurked beneath the illusion of peace. Under the high priest's incitement, the evil reputation of the Dark Calamity star grew worse and worse, and the priests who discovered the truth were all cruelly silenced by him. That day, another uninvited guest arrived at the palace. A woman who looked strikingly like the Empress secretly took off her heavy hood. A flash of panic passed through the high priest's eyes, but he quickly resumed that hypocritical fake smile. The woman had come to find her biological daughter, but the high priest coldly refused her outright. He said that the payment he had given was already more than enough. If she still wanted Lily to maintain her current identity, then she must not appear before her again. Hearing this, the woman lowered her head and gave a bitter smile. Yes, she really had accepted the high priest's money, but that was, after all, the daughter she had carried for 10 months and given birth to. Greed had once blinded her eyes, but even more than that, she had trusted the high priest's deception. The man wrapped all his schemes up as divine revelations and had her take advantage of a vulnerable moment and intrude into someone else's relationship, simply because she had a face similar to the Empress's. That was why she was able to deceive the emperor and spend a night with him. But afterward, the woman who had done wrong became more and more regretful. In the end, she still paid the price for her greed. She had no choice but to move away from the imperial city and live under a false name. Originally, she had already accepted such a life, but a medical examination last month left her utterly shocked. The doctor said she had long since lost the ability to bear children, so her daughter was very likely an inhuman monster. The woman uneasily voiced her suspicion, but in her innocence, she had not yet realized that danger had already arrived. Then she saw the high priest narrow his eyes darkly, threateningly telling her that this was the will of God. A body incapable of bearing children had nevertheless given birth to the Empire's light. What holier miracle could there be? After saying that, the man waved the sharp dagger in his hand. The woman was so frightened on the spot that she did not dare say another word. But paper can never wrap up fire. In the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed, and these 5 years could be said to be little Tylode's happiest and most joyful time. She would no longer feel heartbroken over her partial brothers, nor did she need to lower herself and curry favor with so-called family anymore. The girl devoted a great deal of time to magical research, and soon possessed a terrifying power unmatched by anyone. She also found the family members who were truly worth her devotion. Every day, Different bursts of laughter echoed through the Empress's palace, and the smile on the little princess's face gradually became more frequent. However, on the other side, the two brothers, consumed by regret, were not doing well at all. Guilt kept swelling under the catalyst of time. Soon it swallowed their entire lives. The crown prince would often hallucinate the girl's voice, sweetly calling him brother. But when he came back to his senses, the only one left in the room was his solitary self. No one would ever care about his injured body again, and no one would place the only remaining quilt over him anymore. In the end, he had lost the younger sister who had loved him deeply. As for the second prince, his condition was even worse. For a full 5 years, he remained trapped in the apology he had never managed to say. When he closed his eyes, he saw his sister's tearful accusations. When he opened them, he saw the figure of that person leaving without looking back. Exhausted beyond measure, he often held that cloak which was no longer clean. Only now did he finally understand what it felt like to love someone and never attain them. However, his sister had already made an agreement with them not to see each other again for 10 years. Even though the brothers humbly begged in front of the Empress's palace gates, the resolute little princess still chose to keep her doors shut and refused to see them. And during these 5 years, some other things also happened. First, there was the crown prince of the neighboring country. He rebelled and seized the throne. The Grand Duke who helped him ascend the throne was none other than Riven, who had taken in the little princess back then. The gentle boy had become tall and mature under the trials of time, and his rapidly expanding power had already begun to threaten the gradually declining empire. Another matter was the purification ceremony that was about to begin. Ever since the little princess secluded herself in the Empress's palace, the empire had suffered the longest-lasting natural disaster in its history. The dried-up land could not grow a single blade of grass. The raging plague claimed countless lives. Countless refugees were left homeless and displaced, and the high priest blamed all the disasters on the little princess. That despicable man wanted to use the ignorant masses to eliminate the true light. But what he had not expected was that the emperor would therefore launch a sacred purification ceremony. This meant that all members of the royal family had to be present. And Lily, as a creation of dark magic, simply could not withstand the holy light that purified sin. No one could believe it. The dark princess, who had been treated as a harbinger of disaster, had actually received God's blessing. And the light princess, who had been revered as a divine maiden, did not even dare to touch the faintest holy light. For a moment, the venue rang with the people's incredulous cries, and the fake green tea princess was already trembling in fear because just a few days earlier, she had discovered a terrifying secret about herself. Her blood was an eerie green. That was a trait said to belong only to artificially made puppets. In other words, she was not the emperor's daughter at all. Everything she had now was completely fake. Her father's favoritism, her brother's affection, the people's adoration, and the glory of being the light princess. All of this should have belonged to her sister, and she was merely a green-blooded monster created by magic. How could she possibly accept such a despairing truth? She did not want to be despised by everyone like her sister had been. Her brothers and the prince of the holy nation could only belong to her alone. At that moment, the seed of jealousy completely took root and sprouted in the girl's heart. However, just then, the door to the room was knocked on heavily. Hearing the head maid's voice from outside, the girl immediately changed out of the long dress stained with blood. And along with it, she also shed that ugly face she showed behind others' backs. However, in the next second, cracks appeared in the girl's hypocritical mask because she heard the head maid say that the sacred purification ritual was about to begin. In the empire, receiving a blessing was an extremely important aristocratic ceremony, and only the legitimate royal family could receive the baptism of holy light. But the emperor's command was equally impossible to disobey. So, amid uneasy waiting, the day of the purification ritual arrived. As always, the green tea younger sister was dressed in white. Harmless in appearance, she was like a pure little white flower. But little Taylody, as the dark princess, wore a luxurious black dress. Its night-like color made her the most dazzling focus in the venue. The moment the emperor saw his daughter, he froze in place. That similar appearance made him think of his beloved wife in her youth. Guilt washed over him like a tide and completely drowned him. Only after a long while did the man barely manage to greet his daughter. However, the little princess only gave a perfunctory nod. She no longer wanted to have anything to do with this irresponsible father. After that, the eldest prince and the second prince also stepped forward with faces full of regret to apologize. Their ingratiating expressions were filled with deliberate gentleness and concern toward their sister. But years upon years of disappointment had already completely shattered the girl's scarred heart. Without a second thought, she rejected her brother's humble apology, and the unwilling eldest prince still tried every possible way to make her stay. However, at that moment, the ceremonial horns suddenly sounded. The helpless man could only stop awkwardly. And next came the royal family's blessing ceremony, in order of age. Little Taylody was placed before Lily, and when it was her turn, the holy light of baptism failed to appear smoothly. This meant that the blessing ceremony had failed on the spot. The guests watching the ceremony instantly erupted into an uproar, and claims that a disaster star had descended rose one after another. Little Taylody on the stage also fell into bewildered confusion. However, In the very next second, an even more powerful sphere of light appeared above the girl's head. This was the blessing mark exclusive to the gods. The black-haired imperial princess who had been treated as a harbinger of disaster had instead received the highest level divine blessing during the baptism ceremony. The gentle holy light illuminated the entire temple. This scene, like a miracle, instantly astonished everyone present. Those rumors slandering her also collapsed on their own at that moment. Some people had even already begun to question the authenticity of the oracle. So, under the guidance of public opinion, everyone's gaze fell on Lily, who was preparing for baptism. Knowing the truth, the little green tea girl could only tremble among the crowd. But under everyone's stern gaze, she had no choice but to force herself onto the blessing altar. The girl desperately maintained the fake smile on her face, but His Highness, as the giver of blessings, had already noticed something abnormal about her. The deathly aura on this person was far heavier than he had imagined, and he could only try to continue completing the purification that followed. At this very moment, Lily's mind was already on the verge of collapse. All kinds of ominous thoughts lingered in her mind. All kinds of ominous thoughts circled in her mind. She thought of her sister. She thought of the Holy Maiden of Light, whose identity she had stolen. She had witnessed her sister's miserable life, so she absolutely could not lose everything she possessed now. In the next second, the girl violently flung away the divine envoy's arm. She curled up her trembling body in an almost crazed state. The venue instantly filled with waves of discussion, but Lily on the stage selectively turned a deaf ear. She stubbornly demanded that the high priest baptize her alone. Such a request immediately aroused the people's suspicion. However, at that very moment, the doors of the temple were anxiously pushed open. The man was seen drawing the girl who had collapsed on the ground into his arms with a loving expression. He used a clumsy lie to make up an excuse that Lily was feeling unwell. And this solemn ceremony also ended hastily amid the little green tea girl's farce. Little Taylody, who had nothing else to do, turned to leave without the slightest attachment. However, just then, an aged voice called out to her from behind. The person who came was the little princess's father, and the man's eyes were filled with helplessness and exhaustion. He pleaded with his daughter to give him a chance to atone. The emperor wanted to build a palace near the imperial city for the little princess, so that in the rest of his life, he could look at his daughter a few more times. The man's voice was mixed with stagnant sobs, and the two brothers at the side also followed by apologizing humbly. They lowered their once proud heads. As family, they begged their sister to grant them forgiveness just once. Unfortunately, their self-abasement did not win even the slightest pity from the little princess. The originally calm girl had already fallen completely into darkness. Both brothers were humbly apologizing to their sister, but the little princess, whose heart had been broken, had already chosen to turn completely dark. She disdainfully avoided the eldest prince's touch. Her indifferent face was filled with a mocking sneer. She asked her brothers, on what grounds should she forgive them? The one forgotten in the corner and left uncared for was her. The one who shivered from hunger in the cold winter was also her. She too had once envied the younger sister, who was cherished in the palms of the family's hands. She too had once followed behind them, calling out brother in a fawning voice. But what her compromises brought her was only ever-escalating harm. It was her brothers who had personally killed that obedient and sensible child. So what right did they have now to ask for a chance to be forgiven? What right did they have to ask her, the victim, to pretend that nothing had ever happened? In the depths of night, she would still remember the eldest prince's low growl restrained with anger when he forbade her to call him brother. She would remember the second prince's contemptuous gaze when he found her filthy. At such times, her heart felt as if it were being sliced apart, hurting so badly it nearly bled. So she no longer wanted to see the people who had hurt her. Their self-righteous apologies had already seriously disrupted her life. At that moment, everyone present lowered their heads in shame, not daring to look at her directly. The eldest prince even guiltily avoided his sister's gaze. He awkwardly pressed his cracked lips together, and in the end only managed to squeeze out a pale and powerless excuse. He had naively believed that time could heal all wounds. He thought that as long as he sincerely reflected, he could treat everything as though it had never happened. He had even hoped that his sister could understand their former coldness and neglect as merely the family's poor way of expressing themselves. But now it seemed that his former self had been far too arrogant. He had only wanted, after obtaining forgiveness, to no longer be tormented by his conscience. But what did his sister truly need? For a moment, the hall fell into a strange silence. Just then, a servant hurried over to report that a delegation of envoys from the neighboring country had suddenly arrived, interrupting everyone's thoughts. With no other choice, the princes could only go receive the guests first. The eldest prince looked apologetically at his sister, whose expression was cold, and the exhausted little princess only wanted to leave this hall as soon as possible. She did not want to waste any more time on this selfish family. However, in the next second, a familiar male voice caught her attention. It was Riven. There was no way she could have mistaken it. During that hardest stretch of time, it was that boy who had given her the courage to change her fate. She had thought that in this lifetime, they would never have another chance to meet again, but she had not expected that they would reunite again at such an awkward moment. The little princess looked toward that tall young man with full expectation. 5 years of separation were enough to make those former memories become engraved deep into one's heart, but the distance distant Riven only nodded politely. Then he walked past the girl, whose heart was brimming with joy. That cold reaction instantly made the shocked little Tailodi feel as though she had fallen into an ice cavern. The true Princess of Light was about to return to her rightful place, and the identity disguised by the green tea younger sister could finally no longer be concealed. Ever since Lily refused the baptism at the sacred ceremony, her status in the hearts of the people had also plummeted because no one could accept a Princess of Light who could not receive a blessing. People began to suspect what truth was really hidden behind that oracle. At some point, rumors that the real princess had been switched had already spread rapidly among the common people. And after hearing this terrible news, distraught and at a complete loss, Lily once again ran to the high priest for help. She collapsed weakly onto the cold ground, her frail body trembling uncontrollably. She questioned the high priest incoherently. Why was her blood such a strange green? Why did her wounds heal at a speed visible to the naked eye? Every abnormal sign pointed to a terrifying truth that was impossible to accept. She was nothing more than a green-blooded monster created by dark magic. So, clinging to the last pitiful shred of hope, she humbly crawled on her knees to the high priest's feet, as if grasping at the final straw that could save her life. She desperately begged the high priest to give her a reasonable explanation, but to her surprise, the only response she received was the man's long silence. The next second, the grim-faced high priest kicked Lily over. He mercilessly tore apart the girl's humble sense of identity. Then he burst into mad laughter, now that the secret had been completely exposed. This hypocritical man had finally lost all interest in continuing the act. With a cold and sinister expression, he threatened the girl, and Lily's heart had already fallen completely into madness and collapse. She, who had always been adored like the center of attention, simply could not accept falling from the pedestal, so she stubbornly placed all the blame on little Tailodi. As long as the true Princess of Light disappeared forever, no one would ever be able to threaten her current position again. At that thought, Lily completely shed her former timid appearance. Struggling, she curled her lips into a cruel sneer. Meanwhile, the little princess was hiding alone in her room, drowning in sorrow. She was still holding a black ribbon in her hand. It was a gift she had embroidered for the boy with her own hands 5 years ago. But now it seemed there was no longer any reason to keep it. She was merely an insignificant passerby in his life. She had not even managed to leave behind a single trace worth remembering. The more the little princess thought about it, the more unbearable it became. But she did not know that at this very moment, Riven was hurrying toward her palace. The boy's eyes were filled with longing and urgency he could no longer suppress. He had already waited a full 5 years for this moment. During those 5 years, there had not been a single moment when he did not miss the sister who was not related to him by blood. But back in the hall, he had not had the courage to step forward and recognize her. He feared that his identity would bring unnecessary trouble to the little princess. He also feared that this noble imperial princess had long since forgotten him, a brother who had only accompanied her for a few days. But now it seemed that all his worries had been unnecessary. Little Tailodi had never forgotten him. The boy rushed to the queen's palace gates as fast as he could, and head on, he ran into the girl he had cherished in the deepest part of his heart. This sudden reunion left both of them frozen in place, at a complete loss. After a long time, until the glow of the setting sun gradually stretched their shadows, the two of them seemed to reach the same thought at once, and softly said together, "Long time no see." At that moment, the slow-witted Riven suddenly realized that the girl he had always thought of as his little sister had already grown up. Seeing his beloved little sister again, Riven was so stunned by the beautiful little princess that he could not speak for a moment. He finally realized that the clumsy little girl had truly grown up, and her figure had long since become tall and slender. Her features had also lost their childishness and matured into those of an adult. Just standing there quietly was enough to make it impossible to look away. Her fitted dress made her graceful figure appear even more captivating. The boy only felt that the strings of his heart had been violently plucked. The restless rhythm in his chest fluttered in panic like a startled bird. He suddenly forgot every word he had prepared to say, but the little princess bit her lower lip with a complicated expression. However, the little princess bit down on her lower lip with a conflicted look. She asked Riven whether he had already forgotten that she existed. The girl nervously twisted the ribbon in her hand. She was afraid to hear the boy say that confirming answer with his own lips. But in the next second, what sounded by her ear was his incoherent explanation instead. That flustered appearance was nothing like the decisive and ruthless person of rumor. At that moment, the little princess was amused by Riven's adorable reaction. He was still the gentle brother from her memory. The girl rolled her eyes playfully. Then she began to scold the boy in a righteous tone. She had been sad for a long time because of this misunderstanding. After reuniting, the two of them seemed to have endless secrets to share. They shared with each other the years they had not spent together during those 5 years. Little Tailodi spoke of the happy days in the queen's palace, but Riven's eyes were filled only with heartache. He knew what kind of slander the little princess had borne all these years. He also knew just how difficult her life in the imperial palace had been. This time, he had come intending to take the girl away directly. It was just that he still had not found the right moment to say it. Before they knew it, the sky had already grown dark, and only then did the little princess suddenly remember that she still had a gift she had not given. She took out the ribbon she had prepared 5 years ago, with Riven's name clumsily embroidered on it. Just as she was about to speak, a sudden rustling sound came from the bushes. The two of them lifted their heads and saw Lily with a gloomy face. Only then did little Taylody realize that they had already walked into her younger sister's lily garden. And at this moment, Lily still had not recovered from the blow of having her identity exposed. She looked at her sister walking side by side with the handsome Duke of Fulman in jealousy. And the Holy Nation's envoy had also always stayed very close to her sister. The seed of hatred completely took root and sprouted at that moment. Her originally beautiful face also became hysterical under the catalyst of hatred. What right did you have to come out of the Queen's palace without permission? What right did you have to steal the life that should have belonged to me? At that moment, little Taylody was completely enraged by Lily's shameless words. She immediately spoke in firm rebuttal, because the little princess still did not know the truth of her own birth. The scheming fake younger sister shamelessly continued concealing the truth. She clearly knew that she was not the princess of light who symbolized hope, yet she still brazenly occupied her sister's identity. She hated little Taylody. She hated this older sister, who had taken everything from her. Those affections had clearly all been meant to belong to her. But now, she had become the one occupying the magpie's nest, and her brother had not visited her chambers in a long time. The Holy Nation's envoy also only had eyes for that lowly older sister. She absolutely would not lose to a jinx that brought misfortune. Pyrese's only light could only be her noble self. Lily cast aside the guilty look she had worn just moments ago. She aggressively questioned her sister. Why had she run out of the Queen's palace without permission? It was only because of her mercy that her sister had been allowed to live until now. Therefore, someone who is a jinx should be overwhelmed with gratitude for her charity. The humiliating words came one after another. The little princess clenched her fists in anger. Her sister's increasing insolence made her unwilling to keep tolerating it any longer. Besides, she had never said that she would remain in the Queen's palace forever. Just as the girl was about to speak in rebuttal, the Duke of Fulman, who had been silent all this time, suddenly stepped forward. He looked at the hideous-faced Lily as if evaluating her. Compared with the image of light described in the divine oracle, was this really the holy maiden of light worshipped by the people of Pyresa? She was not even 1,000th as wonderful as little Taylody. Then the man looked at Lily expressionlessly. He asked the girl whether she even understood what rank and upbringing meant. To insult her elder sister, who was also an imperial princess. Was this the etiquette a princess of the Pyresa Empire was supposed to have? The man's words nailed Lily to the spot. Always treated like the center of adoration, when had she ever suffered such humiliation? The endless blows pushed this fragile girl completely to the brink of collapse. She immediately shrieked like a shrew on the spot. "It's all your fault. Everything is because you ruined my life." At that moment, Lily lunged at her sister regardless of everything. She was determined to personally ruin that face that only knew how to seduce men. But before she could even touch a single strand of the little princess's hair, Riven had already grabbed her wrist tightly. That warning look was as sharp as an eagle's gaze. He coldly warned the little schemer not to do anything to hurt her sister. After saying that, the man shielded the little princess and left without looking back. And Lily, who was left standing there, had already sunk into unprecedented madness. She vented her fury by crushing patch after patch of lilies in the garden. Wherever her blood stained, it instantly turned into barren wasteland. The power of darkness was also completely exposed at that moment. She wanted to devour that only light and then replace it. Meanwhile, the little princess, who had slipped out of the palace, had already arrived at the bustling streets. A wide hood hid the girl's long hair, black as the night. She and Riven simply wandered aimlessly beneath the moonlight, talking and laughing. The two of them seemed to have returned to childhood. But just then, the appearance of a little boy interrupted their thoughts. The boy fell heavily to the ground. His pitiful appearance truly made one's heart ache. Soft-hearted little Taylody immediately used healing magic, but the hood on her head had slipped off at some point. Now, her black hair could no longer be hidden. The black-haired imperial princess, regarded as a symbol of ill omen, had actually used the rare healing magic of the world. The little boy who had been healed stood there in a daze. Yet as soon as he looked up, he noticed the black hair hanging beside the little princess's ear. At that moment, the boy finally realized it. This was the dark princess spoken of in the rumors, the one said to bring misfortune. He had heard those horrifying rumors more than once. Some had even said that anyone who came into contact with the imperial princess would die a tragic death. The boy had always firmly believed those rumors, but now it seemed that the older sister before him was nothing like what others had said. Instead, a sacred power radiated from all around her, and that powerful healing magic made people feel warm. The boy silently stood up and was surprised to find that all the pain in his body had disappeared. But the little princess noticed the black hair that had slipped down over her shoulder. She hurriedly pulled over her hood and covered it again. But by her ear rang the boy's heartfelt admiration. He praised the little princess's hair, saying it was as beautiful as the night sky. His clear eyes looked incomparably sincere under the glow of the lights. Before long, The boy skipped away at the sound of his older brother calling him. But the little princess's heart could not calm down for a long time. The lively gathering continued on. Brilliant fireworks bloomed one after another in the night sky. But the peace of this moment was only an illusion before the storm. The power of darkness had already infiltrated the interior of the imperial city. After the celebration, a silent plague suddenly swept through the entire imperial capital. The ministers were helpless in the face of it. Only the holy nation's envoy sent some clue. This was the curse that descended after forbidden magic had been used. Only magic blessed by the gods could save the infected patients. So, despite everyone's opposition, the little princess resolutely went to the area where the plague had broken out. Although she herself did not know whether her power would actually be of any use, she could not stand by and do nothing, waiting inside the palace. Thus, she encountered the second prince, who had also come to investigate. The moment their eyes met, both of them froze. But very quickly, the little princess turned away and left as if she had not seen him. She treated it as nothing more than an accidental encounter. She did not want to hear those same old apologies anymore. And as he watched his younger sister's retreating figure, a sudden pain pierced the second prince's chest. He wanted to rush forward, to tell his sister that it was dangerous here. But when he saw that avoiding gaze, the hand he had stretched out dropped powerlessly again. What right did he even have to call her his sister? He had long since missed all those chances when he should have cared for her. Now, someone else was already by his sister's side as well. The only self-awareness he should have was to stop disturbing her. Thinking of this, the second prince turned away in loneliness, and the most urgent matter now was to solve the plague so that his sister would no longer remain in danger. At the same time, a childish male voice. Meanwhile, a childish boy's voice drew the little princess's attention. The girl looked up and saw that it was the little boy who had bumped into her that day. This child's older brother had contracted a severe plague a few days earlier. If he was not saved soon, he might really die. In order to save the infected commoners, the little princess no longer hid her strength. Ignoring everyone's objections, she went to the slum where the plague was raging. She wanted to use the magic her mother had left behind to help those commoners who were on the verge of death. When the epidemic had just begun, the conflicted girl had not failed to consider turning a blind eye. But as the imperial princess of the empire, she had a duty to protect her people. So when the little princess learned that the boy's older brother had been infected, she resolutely followed him to the dangerous slum. The house hidden deep in the alley looked as though it could collapse at any moment. The air was still filled with a large swath of nauseating moldy smell. The boy looked awkwardly at the princess beside him, but the little princess returned a comforting smile, showing that she did not mind these things. She herself had once lived in such a harsh environment, and what mattered most now was to heal the boy's older brother first. So the few of them squeezed into the cramped room together, but the situation before her far exceeded the little princess's imagination. The man's body was covered with reddish-brown rashes, and every breath he took was accompanied by immense pain. Was this the incurable cursed disease described in the books? She did not know whether her magic would actually work. At that moment, the girl gathered all her strength into her hands. She devoutly recited the healing spell, but the miracle she had expected did not appear. The man was still lingering on the brink of death under the torment of his illness. Seeing this, the little princess took a deep breath. She tried another healing spell. Unfortunately, effort after effort still failed to bring the result she wanted. Sweat soaked her forehead. Her body also trembled unceasingly from magical exhaustion. Even so, the little princess still gritted her teeth and endured the pain. If she tried one more time, maybe it would work. If only she were the true princess of light, then she could heal everyone's curse. However, just at this moment, the wooden door behind her was suddenly shoved open with force. The person who came was Riven, his face full of worry. After learning that the little princess had gone to the plague-ridden slum, the man had searched everywhere without stopping. His whole heart was tied to the girl. Only now was he finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. The next second, Riven strode quickly to little Taylodi. Ignoring the stunned gazes of the crowd, he pulled the girl he loved into his arms, feeling their heartbeats pressed close together. Only in this way could he be sure that he had not lost her. Riven's embrace tightened more and more, but the little princess gently pushed him away without leaving a trace. She could feel the man's anxious fear of losing her, but now was simply not the time for romance. If this continued, the entire imperial city would be swallowed by the curse. She had to find a solution as quickly as possible. Seeing that the little princess was preparing to activate the last of her magic power, Riven quickly handed her a thick magic book. It was an ancient spellbook that had not yet been deciphered. It should be of use when it came to dispelling the curse. The man smiled and nodded at the little princess. He believed that the girl before him would surely create a miracle. In truth, it was not as though Riven had never thought of persuading the little princess to return to the palace. But on second thought, he dismissed that absurd idea. If she cared only about saving her own life, then she would not be the little Taylodi he knew. The little princess he knew was kind. She was brave. She was someone who, even while in darkness, would still think of others. That child had never been a flower pampered in a greenhouse. So how could he foolishly let her flee for her life alone? Moreover, Riven also believed in little Tylody's strength. It was just that he did not know how the people would react by then. The darkness, despised by everyone, had instead become the light that saved the world. It seemed that a certain mastermind behind the scenes was finally about to lose patience. The identity of the true and false imperial princesses was about to be revealed. The high priest hiding in the shadows was finally about to lose patience as well. During these past days, the little princess had been researching a way to treat the plague. The people's attitude toward her had also undergone a tremendous change. After all, in the face of disaster, it was little Tylody who had helped them regardless of her own safety. While the princess of light they worshipped had hidden in the palace and never once shown herself, public opinion had also unconsciously begun to lean toward the little princess. And within the high priest's temple, a man dressed like an assassin swaggered right in. He familiarly picked up an apple from the table. With a wicked grin, he reported on the disaster outside. It turned out that both the plague and the curse were this man's doing. Lily, who knew nothing, accidentally barged in. The moment she saw the masked man, the girl's pupils suddenly shrank. She recognized those scarlet eyes beneath the mask. This was the assassin who had broken into her bedchamber back then. If the eldest prince had not protected her with his life at the time, she would have died on the night of that assassination attempt. Yet she had never expected that this person would actually know the high priest. Lily instinctively wanted to run away. She even hoped that her brother would suddenly appear to protect her. However, the man's next words made the girl before him feel as though she had fallen into an icy abyss. It turned out that he had long known Lily's secret of being an artificial human. Looking at the girl's little face, pale as paper, the masked man let out a crazed, demonic laugh. He said that he was the one who had originally decided to create the monster, and that he very much wanted to hear Lily call him a dear father. At this moment, the girl finally collapsed to the floor, unable to hold herself up any longer, covering her face and crying in despair. Why did her life have to rot into what it was now? She absolutely did not want to acknowledge a madman as her father. It was all that damned little Tylody's fault. Back then, she should have begged her brother to take that person's life. Just then, the high priest, who had been watching coldly all along, suddenly spoke. He softly comforted Lily and told her not to be sad. At this moment, the girl seemed to have grasped the last straw that could save her life. She clung pitifully to the high priest's feet, only to see a small bottle in the man's hand. He told Lily that it was a deadly poison. As long as she could get the little princess to drink it successfully, she would still be the only light of the Pyresa Empire. But just to be safe, Lily would also have to take the poison together with her. The high priest said that with him there, absolutely nothing would go wrong. But where the girl could not see, a calculating glint flashed through the man's eyes. A certain foolish little schemer was still immersed in the fantasy of getting rid of her older sister, completely unaware that she had long since become someone else's discarded pawn. The black-haired imperial princess, despised by everyone, had instead become the only savior capable of ending the plague. After hundreds of sleepless attempts, the little princess finally found a way to cure the curse. She stood up with a resolute gaze. A golden magic array instantly formed beneath her hands. The large patches of red rash gradually faded away from the patient's body. This caused the people watching nearby to gasp in amazement. This was a miracle, a holy maiden sent by heaven to save them. Before long, the man on the bed slowly woke up. The moment he saw the little princess, he hurriedly dropped to his knees with a heavy thud, thinking of all the slander the girl had once borne. The man on the floor felt nothing but unbearable shame. The little princess, however, waved her hand somewhat embarrassedly, but in the very next second, a dizzy wave of weakness suddenly struck. Before the unsteady girl could react, she fell straight down. Fortunately, Riven beside her was quick-eyed and quick-handed. He caught the unconscious little princess in his arms at once. Looking at the girl's little face, pale as paper, the man's eyes were filled with indescribable heartache. This girl was still as stubbornly brave as when she was little. He ordered his subordinates to remain where they were and await orders. As for himself, he took the little princess back to the Empress's palace to rest, while on the other side, the cured man was staring at his intact legs in disbelief. He had never imagined that one day he, a cripple, would be able to stand up again. From that day on, more and more people learned of little Tylody's legendary deeds. Black hair and black eyes were no longer synonymous with a bringer of disaster. The people all waited for the little princess, once her magic power recovered, to heal them, and in the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. Little Tylody also woke from her long slumber, but before she could fully recover her spirits, news came from the palace that the first prince had been infected. Noah was found outside the imperial capital. At that time, he had already contracted a severe plague. A mage from the Holy Nation immediately sent him back to his own bedchamber. However, after a complicated round of diagnosis and treatment, he could only shake his head regretfully at the emperor. At this moment, The mage still did not know that the little princess had already found a cure. He could only wait until the girl woke up before asking for her help. Hearing that her brother had been infected, Taelody froze for a moment. Countless painful memories flashed through her mind. The cloak that was shunned as dirty, those hurtful words, the injuries of the past were still vivid before her eyes. But he was, after all, her brother, a family member connected to her by blood. She could stubbornly choose not to forgive him, but she could not bear to watch her brother lose his life under the torment of the plague. In the end, despite her body having only just recovered, the little princess resolutely rushed to the second prince's bedchamber. And there, she happened to encounter the eldest prince who had come to visit, the black-haired imperial princess whom everyone treated as a bringer of disaster. Yet after learning that her brother was gravely ill, she rushed over to care for him regardless of her own safety. He wanted to stop little Taelody from taking the risk, yet he feared that his clumsy way with words would make his younger sister angry. But even the powerful divine officer was helpless against Pyrese's curse. He absolutely could not let his only younger sister fall into danger. Just as the two of them were tugging at each other outside the door, a mage from the Holy Nation also hurried over anxiously and grabbed the little princess by the arm. He grabbed the little princess by the arm, his face full of tension as he urged her not to take the risk. This was no longer a curse that ordinary magic could heal. Once infected, the outcome was almost certainly death. But at this moment, little Taelody could no longer care about everyone's attempts to stop her. She resolutely pushed open the door to the room. And at this very moment, the second prince also heard the commotion outside. He struggled to open his heavy eyes. He lifted his head, only to see an unexpected figure. It was his sister. Had his sister come to see him? But in the next second, the boy revealed a bitter smile. It seemed that he was already having hallucinations before death. How could a bastard like him deserve his sister's forgiveness? At the very least, let him say that belated apology. Yet in the next second, the still repenting second prince widened his eyes in shock. The real touch in his hand moved him to tears. So his sister had really come to see him when he had lost everything and been abandoned by others. It was his sister who was still willing to stay by his side without abandoning him. At this moment, guilt surged like a tide and completely drowned him. Then he heard an incantation he had never heard before ring out by his ear. In the next second, a holy white light enveloped the entire room. He felt a powerful force purifying the curse within his body. At this sight, the people outside the door also hurried in anxiously. Together, they witnessed the little princess cast an ancient magic lost for 1,000 years. This was definitely not something that could be accomplished by magic power alone. She was the holy maiden of light spoken of in the divine prophecy, the one who would bring hope. Just like that, the red rash on the second prince's body rapidly faded at a speed visible to the naked eye, and before long, he miraculously sat up, feeling the joy of surviving a catastrophe. The boy pulled the little princess into his arms. In the days that followed, the second prince began his own plan of atonement. Every day, he would send a fresh rose still covered with dew to his younger sister's bedchamber. Then, in the little princess's name, he would send flowers to the commoners. And on top of that, the girl had cured the spreading plague. More and more people began to question the truth of the divine prophecy. That truth, which had seemed unshakable, also developed cracks at this moment. But no one had expected that in only a few days, the little princess would fall into a coma because of Lily's attempt on her life. However, no one was able to cure the poison developed by the high priest.